Chapter 518. Along the way they saw many ruins. Most of these ruins were destroyed during the battle between Li Yunxin and Su Sheng. There were even embers burning in some places. Not to mention seeing such a scene in Little Cloud Mountain, where almost no one could enter. Even if they saw such a scene in a city in the secular world, they would feel uneasy. But Grandmaster D was in front, and the three people behind him. But he just kept a straight face and pressed the corners of his mouth tightly. He didn't seem to panic. It was as if he believed the unconvincing words he said to the three people before. Since there was a war outside, it was normal for someone to fight their way here. It showed that these four people seemed to have an extremely important thing to do. It was so important that even if they found out that there was an intruder here, they still had to brace themselves and go inside. The four people walked through the palace and ruins like this for almost 2 hours. They didn't hear any noise or see anyone, and they slowly calmed down. Thus, they were no longer as restless and silent as before. They began to chat casually for a while. The old man first said, "Who on earth fought their way in? This place looks strange. Did they fight for a while, and then get kicked out again?" These words were not very useful, but the two people behind him only agreed with yes. Yes, and strange. It seemed that the more they said such words, the more they believed that there were no enemies here, and that they could affect reality. Grandmaster D originally ignored them, but after the three people behind him repeated these words for a long time, he seemed to be annoyed and said while walking, "Why do you care who fought their way in? There is a problem with the core of Cloud Mountain, and there is also a problem with the restriction outside and the formation inside. We didn't notice it when we were in the sky, and only noticed it now that we're on the ground. It means that if Su Yusong and Zhuomuja didn't do a good job outside, it's not impossible for a few demons to come in. But did you forget what you experienced in the past? How is the situation then compared to now? After all these years, what have you become?" He asked a series of questions. When he said this, there was a huge stone blocking the road ahead. It was originally a stone pillar, and it needed more than 10 people to encircle it. After being blasted apart by Li Yunxin and Su Sheng, half of them were in the way. If one wanted to pass through here, they would either have to climb over a 2-story stone pillar or take a detour. However, Duke D did not stop. As he walked, he raised his hand and patted the stone pillar in front of him with the back of his hand. It was as if what was blocking in front of him was just a bunch of leaves. There was a buzzing sound. The air in front of him immediately exploded into a large cloud of mist. Several bright electric arcs appeared in the fog, as if there were traces of lightning in a huge air bubble. The stone pillars blocking the way immediately turned into the tiniest specks of dust, dispersing into the air. It was not some kind of divine ability or Dao technique. It was just strength. The incredible strength and speed of a palm strike could tear apart even the tiniest unit in the air, let alone the stone pillar. The ruins the four of them had seen along the way. If they wanted to, it would only be a matter of raising their hands and feet. However, even though he had displayed such terrifying power, the three people behind him did not show the slightest bit of surprise or envy. It was as if they were already used to it. Moreover, they also had such power. Duke D cleared the obstacle and continued to say, "Moreover, we should settle the things here and leave as soon as possible. What's there to be afraid of when we reach the sky?" But obviously, his words did not make the three people feel more at ease. No matter what they were going to do, it seemed that the three of them did not want to be involved. They just wanted Duke D to settle it himself. At this moment, the ground suddenly shook. It was as if an earth dragon was turning over. The rubble and the ruins scattered, and the half-broken palaces collapsed with a rumble. The trees on the ground began to shake, and even the water in the pool began to shake violently, as if something was going to come out of the water. This situation had never happened on Mount Yunshan. However, instead of calling it an earthquake, it was more like someone outside the Cloud Mountain had slammed into the behemoth. The four of them were stunned by the sudden change. The shock only lasted for a moment. Soon, everything returned to normal. However, this change made the three elders, who were not brave enough to begin with, retreat again. They stopped and stared at Duke D. "What's wrong? Did they fight their way in?" Duke D opened his mouth and was about to speak, but he suddenly found that it was raining. There were no clouds above his head, but raindrops fell from the void. The appearance of these raindrops was also very strange. They were the size of soybeans and were dark blue, as if the deepest ocean had been frozen. And then the debris was taken out and polished into the shape of raindrops. They fell very slowly. As they fell, transparent, wave-like ripples appeared around them. It was as if the void on the floating mountain was water, and they were moving on the water. After about 2 breaths of time, the raindrops began to change color. However, the word discoloration couldn't accurately describe the changes that had occurred to them. They were originally dark blue, but now they began to turn into a deep black. However, even black could be considered a kind of color. But the black color of these raindrops was the black that appeared after all the colors were absorbed into it. In other words, it was nothingness. The next moment, the gravel, dust, withered leaves, and sawdust that were scattered on the ground slowly floated up. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared. No one knew where it went. The raindrops fell without a sound, and the floating mountain remained silent. Before this, Grandpa D looked calm, but the 3 elders behind him were restless. However, at this moment, when they saw the slowly falling black rain, there was only one word that could describe the expressions on the faces of Grandmaster D and the 3 elders. Horrified. Extreme horror. Black spot. Ah. The old man shouted and ran back in the direction he came from. As he ran, the 2 people behind him also abandoned Gongzi D and followed him after a slight hesitation. They had already been walking on the floating mountain for a quarter of an hour. In fact, they were already very far away from the door of light that they came out of. Although these things, which they called black spots, fell slowly, there were still a lot of them. The old man was so shocked that he almost lost his mind. He just wanted to run back into the light gate before they completely fell. At this moment, the fastest falling black spots were still more than 10 feet above their heads. Looking at their falling speed, it seemed that they could indeed reach their destination. However, he had just run 5 steps when the black spots above his head seemed to be attracted to him. After a slight pause, they suddenly gathered toward him like a swarm of flying insects. He originally had the strong body of a Grand Supreme, but now it seemed to be made of water. In just a breath's time, his body suddenly turned into liquid and was completely absorbed by the black spots. Seeing this horrifying scene, the 2 people behind him were at a loss. However, the black spots did not let them go. In the next moment, the 2 people's bodies were also covered by a group of black spots, and they instantly disappeared without a trace. 3 elders, who had the bodies of Grand Supreme Realm experts, had been silently obliterated just like that. Grandmaster D's face was also filled with panic and fear that he could not hide. But at least he did not lose his mind. He stood in place for 3 breaths' time, as if he was also hesitating whether to turn back or continue doing the extremely important thing that he had repeatedly told the 3 people before. In the end, he took a deep breath and continued walking. But every step he took was extremely cautious, as if the slowly falling black spots in the sky were a group of terrifying beasts. And he was trying not to alarm them. His destination was the Qi Palace. There was still about a quarter of an hour's journey from here to the Qi Palace. He had to reach there before the black spots changed even more horribly and end everything. At this time, Li Yunxin was already hiding in the formation he had drawn. When a painting technique was cultivated to a high level, it was possible to open up a space in the void. For example, the 8 treasures ancient scroll left by the art saint opened up a space in the void. Using a Dao technique, he created something similar to a demon's palace. Currently, Li Yunxin's technique was not at such a high level. However, there were many magic treasures in his ring. Using one or a few of them, along with other techniques, he could achieve a similar effect. But after hiding for a dozen breaths' time, he suddenly felt a shocking change between heaven and earth. This floating mountain also had spiritual energy, and it was astonishingly dense. If the spiritual energy in the mortal world was qi, then the spiritual energy here could be called qis. But such dense spiritual energy was firmly locked by a restriction, as if a large iron plate was pressing down on it. Originally, It was very difficult for it to move. But at this time, it was as if boiling hot water had suddenly splashed on it, corroding this cheese, until it was full of holes. No matter what technique it was based on the local conditions and the surrounding environment. And when the environment of heaven and earth suddenly changed, the formation set up according to the environment also had a problem. Li Yunxin was originally in a scroll on the ground. But now, with a flash of light from the scroll, the formation was actually broken, and he was expelled. He had never encountered such a situation before. So he was bewildered, afraid that he had fallen into some kind of trap. But in the next moment, he also saw the black rain slowly falling from the sky. He had never seen such a thing before. But he was a cultivator, and was far more sensitive to the changes in the chi of heaven and earth than ordinary people. With just a glance, he realized that these things were extremely dangerous. Chapter 519. Just when he had enough time to think about where these things came from, and why they came here, he saw a figure. Someone was coming from behind the ruins in the north. Before Red Lady left the cloudy mountain, she blasted out a palm strike that was as powerful as breaking dry weeds and smashing rotten wood, destroying all the buildings along the way. As a result, all that was left of the palaces on the back were broken walls, and only a few giant pillars were still standing. The figure walked slowly from behind the giant pillars. His footsteps were steady, and his face was expressionless. It seemed that the black rain in the sky was just a drizzle to him, and not worth his attention. However, his slightly stiff footsteps betrayed him. He obviously wanted to run away. He wanted to run, but he forced himself to walk slowly and mechanically, for fear that he would alarm something. Li Yunxin saw him, and he saw Li Yunxin. The newcomer was dressed in gray, had blonde hair, a high nose and deep eyes. It was Grandmaster D. When they saw each other, they were both shocked. Li Yunxin never thought that there would be someone else here. Grandmaster D also didn't expect that he would meet an intruder. However, Li Yunxin had practically killed her way out of dangerous situations these days. Her reaction was extremely fast. When he saw Grandmaster D, he frowned and was about to pounce on him. But when he was about to step forward, Grandmaster D suddenly shouted in a low voice after being stunned for a moment. "Don't move. Walk slowly." A thought flashed through Li Yunxin's mind. Did this person really have a reason for saying such words? Or was he just bluffing to mislead her? But the next moment, the scene in front of him forced him to believe the former. His momentum suddenly increased, and his spiritual power surged. Although it didn't burst out, it was ready to go. Because of this, the few black spots that were originally a distance away from his head suddenly sank down, reaching less than 2 feet in front of him. He was frightened by this thing. At this moment, he was even more alarmed. Those black spots were like the craziest and most dangerous beasts in the world. They made him feel cold from the bottom of his heart, and soaked his limbs and bones. Thus, he immediately dispersed his aura, and did not dare to move even half a step. Only then did the black specks slowly sway and float away leisurely. At this moment, Grandmaster D said in a low voice while walking, "This thing is called black rain. It's the rain of the demon world. Once touched by it, even the body of the Grand Supreme Sage will be torn into pieces." After saying these few words, he was already less than a dozen steps away from Li Yunxin. His footsteps slowed down as he looked at Li Yunxin. "You should be a demon that killed its way in from outside the Cloud Mountain. Only you? Where are the others?" Now that they had appeared here, and the floating mountain was in ruins, they were naturally the demons that had charged in from outside Cloud Mountain. However, Grandmaster D's identity was hard to guess. But in such a soul-stirring moment, guessing was not a wise move. Li Yunxin was a person who knew how to prioritize things. So she restrained her expression and said in a low voice, "They are all dead." Li Yunxin raised his hand and said, "You should stop. I don't know who you are, but I know that you and I are not on the same side. If you come any closer, even in this situation, I have to fight back to be safe." As for the second sage, he looked at Grandmaster D carefully. "He's still outside." As for the second saint, he looked at Grandpa D carefully. "He's still outside, but I think they are about to be defeated by us." Just as he had said, Grandpa D stopped walking, but he continued, "All right. Then let me tell you one thing. The black rain of the demon realm will not stop. In the end, it will connect and destroy Cloud Mountain and Cloud Mountain. It will also destroy the world. In the end, they would join together. Not only would they destroy Little Cloud Mountain and Cloud Mountain, they would also destroy this world. What should I do? Li Yunxin waved his hand and looked at him. What should I do? Li Yunxin waved her hand and looked at him. When he saw the demons appear on the floating mountain, he should have avoided them immediately. Seeing the demons appear on the floating mountain, he should have immediately avoided them and not let them see him. However, he knew how urgent the situation was. The three good-for-nothings had to follow him, no matter how scared they were. Because there was a problem with the spiritual formation at the core of the mountain. When the mountain was moving in the sky, no one noticed the problem. For example, if a car was running on the road, the brakes might be broken. But if you didn't step on it, nothing would happen. But now that the mountain had fallen, the problem was obvious. However, the spiritual formation in the mountain had more than just the function of making the mountain move in the sky. Grandmaster D was not exaggerating. The appearance of the black spots was because of the problem with the spiritual formation. So he had to fix the spiritual formation. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed help. The three cowards knew this. So even if they were scared, they had to follow him. But now they were dead, and he was the only one left. The situation was urgent. He didn't have time to go back and ask for help. He could only try to save the situation. At this moment, he saw a living person on the floating mountain. It was a rare coincidence that only appeared once in 1,000 or 10,000 years. It was unknown whether it was good or bad luck. So when Grandmaster D saw Li Yunxin, his first thought was not the demon broke into the mountain, but, I have a helper. He didn't have time or mood to think about other things. At least he only had one goal. How could he make the demon believe him? The situation was urgent. If he couldn't help but fight, both of them would be finished. He had even thought of a few possibilities and prepared a few excuses in his mind. However, it was just 4 sentences. The demon asked him directly, "What should I do?" These 5 words stunned Di Gong slightly. This demon had a very clever mind and a very quick-witted heart. If his good-for-nothing companions had half of this demon's intelligence, they wouldn't have ended up in this situation. Previously, he had gone straight to the point and went straight to the point. Now that he found out that Li Yunxin had an amazing ability to judge the situation, he couldn't help but ask, "Do you understand what I said? You want to solve the problem of the black rain, so you have to do something. But you need my help." "I understand." Li Yunxin looked at the black rain in the sky with a serious face. It was still falling very slowly. In fact, he didn't really believe in the so-called rain of the demon world. At least he didn't believe it. However, he could feel the fatal danger. This danger couldn't be avoided. It couldn't be delayed or solved by scheming. He had always been good at adapting to the situation. Thinking about other things at this time was no different from suicide. So he asked again, "But are you sure you can solve it?" Grandmaster D was stunned again. But this tiny emotion only lasted for a short moment before it disappeared. He nodded. "As long as you can help me. Follow me. Walk slowly." The expression on Grandmaster D's face didn't escape Li Yunxin's eyes. But he had seen it, and that was all. He could not come to any other conclusion. He knew nothing about the person in front of him. It was impossible to infer other information from his expression and words. Thus she followed his footsteps. Grandmaster D's destination was the Qi Hall. As soon as he entered, he saw the mess in the hall. But he didn't show any other expression. He just pushed aside a few things and walked inside. Those things were all carefully arranged by Li Yunxin before, and they were all set up with formations. Now that he pushed them aside easily, the limited spiritual power in them exploded uncontrollably, creating small electric arcs. However, when the electric arcs exploded on Grandmaster D's body, it was as if they exploded on a body of iron and stone. He didn't even frown. Although he didn't think of using these things to kill the 2 wandering souls, Li Yunxin was secretly shocked by this person's calmness. Such a strong body. At this moment, the roof of the Qi Hall cracked silently. The black spots had fallen. Some of them passed through the roof and floated in, while others absorbed the roof as well. No one knew what was going on. As a result, a startling light began to shine down on the two of them. Li Yunxin pinched the little finger of his left hand subconsciously. He followed him and asked in a low voice, "Who are you?" From what I can see, he looks somewhat familiar. Grandmaster D took 3 steps and said in a deep voice, "Since Cloud Mountain is the ancestral court of the Xianmen, there should be a guardian. Do you think there's no one here after the 2 sages left Cloud Mountain?" Li Yunxin thought for a while and said, "But you didn't show up just now. Because I don't want to care about you kids," Grandmaster D said in a low voice. "What I want to care about is the survival of the human world." After saying this, he took 2 steps forward and said, "You set up these things in this hall to kill the 2 sages? How dare you? They're fake sages." Li Yunxin's footsteps paused, and she tried to distance herself from him. "They're wandering souls. They're puppets of the Freemasons. You call yourself the guardian of Cloud Mountain. Don't you know that?" Grandmaster D stopped. Li Yunxin stopped as well. He tensed up to prevent any accidents. However, what he expected did not happen. The person in front of him lifted his foot and stomped on the ground a few times. The Qi Hall was not wide, but it was deep. Before it was used as a storeroom to store elixirs and artifacts, it must have had other uses, because there was a high platform in the depths of the Qi Hall. If there were thrones on the high platform, and civil and military officials on both sides, the Qi Hall would be like the main hall of an imperial palace. Now Grandmaster D walked under the high platform and stomped his foot. He didn't know what mechanism he had triggered. The high platform opened. Seeing this, Li Yunxin was shocked. He thought he had explored the entire Qi Hall and set up an ambush here. Who would have thought there was a hidden mechanism here? Chapter 520. But there was no mechanical sound when the platform was opened. There was no fluctuation of spiritual power either. If it was a mechanism, there should be a sound. If it was a formation, the Qi of heaven and earth should have changed. However, this high platform bounced up with a chong sound, and then split in half, revealing a bucket-sized hole. It seemed that there was no way to go here. However, Gong Di had crushed it with his stomp. Then he stooped down and, as if he were digging in some muddy pit, used his hand to pry the hole open, as if to make it larger. He said, "If you want to kill them, it's your own business. If you can kill them here, it's your ability. For me, there is no difference between you and them." His tone was very arrogant, but he said it naturally. At this point, he finally tore open the hole, revealing a patch of white light underneath. At this time, the black spots fell lower and lower. 2 or 3 of them almost touched the top of Li Yunxin's head. Fortunately, he slowly moved to the side. Then he avoided them. But according to the current situation, he would not be able to avoid them even if he lay flat on the ground in a quarter of an hour. At this moment, Grandmaster D turned his head and looked at him. "Come." Then he jumped into the hole. In fact, if he thought about the current situation seriously, he might suspect that it was a trap set by the enemy. However, Li Yunxin also knew that the person who could make such a terrible thing, to set up a trap, didn't need to set up a trap. He did not hesitate. He walked over and took a look, then jumped down. In fact, there was another reason why he did this. It was said that there was a formation left by a celestial in Cloud Mountain. Now this person seemed to be heading for that formation. Li Yunxin wanted to see what that thing looked like. When he glanced outside the cave, he only saw that the ground inside was glowing with white light. It was not far away, only a few feet away. But when he jumped down, he realized that it was not the case. He fell for 5 or 6 breaths before his feet touched the ground. However, when his toes touched the ground, he felt a strong force pulling him down. But he soon realized that it was not some other force. It was a reversal of space. When he jumped down, the glowing ground was below him. Now that he had jumped down, the ground had become the ceiling. He immediately adjusted his posture, twisted his waist and stood still. At this moment, he was in a narrow room. It was sealed without any doors or windows. It was about the size of a side room in the Palace of Qi. The ceiling, as he saw it from the outside, was pressed very low. With his size, as long as he straightened his arms and stood on tiptoe, he would be able to touch it. And in the middle of this small room, there was a cocoon. Cocoon was probably the only word that could describe that thing's appearance. It was as tall as a person and floated in the middle of the room. On the outside was a layer of oval light. Countless strands of light weaved together to form an outer shell. Inside was a ball of dark red light. He couldn't see its silhouette and appearance clearly, but he could see that it was slowly rotating, as if it was alive. Li Yunxin opened his mouth, but didn't say anything. He didn't know if this was the legendary spell formation left behind by a deva, or if it was the one that drove the entire cloud mountain. Grandpa D stood 3 steps away from him. He stared at the cocoon for a while, and his face darkened. Li Yunxin followed his gaze, and found a detail that he didn't notice just now. There was a crack on the cocoon. An extremely fine crack ran from top to bottom, and penetrated through the outer layer. Although the outer layer was weaved by many flowing light rays, once it passed through the crack, the light would lose its color. As if the crack and the light did not exist in the same space, and the light had nothing to do with it. "You are Li Yunxin," Grandpa D suddenly said. These 5 words made Li Yunxin purse her lips and sigh softly. "I didn't remember you before. But after seeing you today, I feel that I have underestimated you." Grandpa D didn't look at Li Yunxin when he spoke, but stared at the crack on the cocoon. It seemed that he was just chatting with him, as if he didn't take precautions against him, and didn't mean any harm. "The people around me, the people I order around, none of them can compare to you." He reached out his hand to touch the crack. Li Yunxin saw that every time his finger touched the crack, it disappeared. It seemed that there was another space inside the crack. Then Grandpa D straightened his back and turned to look at Li Yunxin. "Do you want to work for me?" Li Yunxin frowned slowly. "You are," he paused and said in a low voice, "an elder of the Freemasonry." After coming here, Grandpa D didn't seem to be very nervous. He didn't confirm or deny it. Instead, he looked at Li Yunxin and showed a faint smile. "I am a guardian." Li Yunxin thought for a while and said in a low voice, "You only met me once, but you feel that I am far better than all the people around you, so you come to recruit me. In my opinion, this is too perfunctory. You are surrounded by enemies on the Cloud Mountain, but when you saw me of unknown origin, you decided to help me after hearing only 4 sentences." Grandpa D shook his head. "There may be others with such insight and courage in the world, but you are the only one I have seen so far." "Why? You don't believe me?" Li Yunxin laughed. "I'd be a fool if I believed you. If you are an elder of the Freemasonry, I have killed so many of you. Now I want to kill your right-hand man. How can I believe you at this time?" "You mean Su Yusong and Zhuamuja?" Grandpa D thought for a while and raised his eyebrows. "Those 2 people are rebellious. They are useless. They have a grudge against you, so you can kill them if you want. They think I don't know that they want to establish themselves as kings. Humph, but I don't care." He seemed to be talking to himself in the last few sentences. But soon, he focused his gaze on Li Yunxin. "I don't have to recruit you at this time. I want to talk to you, Li Yunxin. This thing is called the Cloud Mountain. It can move in the sky and guard the seam between the human world and the devil world at the same time. Now there is a problem with the core. I have to fix it, but I can't do it myself, so I need your help. But your current cultivation," Grandpa D looked him up and down, "it is far from enough. If I want you to help, I have to teach you a supernatural power. If you learn this supernatural power, you will become stronger and stronger. So, either I teach you, or I take you. Or, I teach you, use you, and then kill you. It's all up to you." Li Yunxin still looked at him with a frown. "You want to refine me into a wandering soul? I didn't know before. But after seeing you today, I feel that you are a hero," Grandpa D said seriously. "A hero cherishes a hero, so you don't have to be a wandering soul. You can join us, the Elders Guild." Li Yunxin was silent for a while. Then he said, "How much time do we have?" Grandpa D understood. "You can think about it for 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Li Yunxin repeated these 3 words softly and stopped talking. He started to pace slowly in the narrow room. 5 minutes later, he stopped in his tracks. He exhaled and looked at Grandpa D, who had been waiting patiently. "Considering the situation in this room, I have thought about it seriously, but I feel that this is a difficult decision. In fact, I have been looking for you. He looked at Grandpa D. I want to ask 2 questions. If you can answer these 2 questions, I think it will help me to make up my mind. If I am as valuable to you as you say I am. Grandpa D nodded. Go ahead. A rare hesitant look appeared on Li Yunxin's face. But he only hesitated for 3 breaths. Li Yunxin said in a low voice, Is there a way to go back? After he said this, the room was silent for 3 breaths. Li Yunxin stared at Grandpa D without blinking. Grandpa D also stared at Li Yunxin. The 2 of them stared at each other for a long time. Then Grandpa D frowned. Where do you want to go? Li Yunxin looked at him. You know. However, it was obvious that Grandpa D did not know. A hint of doubt appeared on his face. He frowned as well. Since you are here, don't you know if you can go back or not? If Li Yunxin was a person who would write every emotion in her heart on her face, she would definitely not be able to hide it. Then, he would definitely shout and stand on the spot in a daze. That was because Grandpa D's ambiguous answer had, in fact, answered 2 questions in his heart. First, they were indeed not from this world. At least, Grandpa D was not from this world. That was why he could understand his question of, is there a way to go back? However, second, Grandpa D's reaction was different from what Li Yunxin had expected. Grandpa D's reaction seemed to indicate that Grandpa D believed that Li Yunxin should know clearly if he could go back or not. This feeling of seeming to match, but also having some deviation, he had felt it before. By Yanjun. After Li Yunxin defeated Fu Lifang in the Emperor's Star Palace of Lord Dongting Mountain, Bai Yanjun had brought him to the underworld. Over there, the White Hell King had said something that he should have understood the moment he heard it. However, the troublesome thing was, Li Yunxin did not understand it. This seemed to imply that Bai Yanjun and the Black Yama King had once chosen a person to become a chosen one. Then, they would help this chosen one and ask him to do things for them. Li Yunxin knew that he was a transmigrator. Therefore, he had no qualms about becoming a chosen one. However, it was then that he realized something must have gone wrong. Something must have gone wrong. He was not the chosen one. He could not understand Bai Yanjun's code at all. He was a fake crown prince. Until now, this familiar feeling appeared once again. He could understand part of what Bai Yanjun had said, but not all of it. Grandpa D could also understand part of what he had said, but not all of it. This seemed to imply that Grandpa D, Bai Yanjun, they were people from the same world. And he was just an accident that was coincidentally involved in this. The long-lost and strong sense of danger appeared in his heart again. However, he was at his wits' end now. He could only hope that no one could see through this. This meant that he had to be very, very careful about anything related to this topic. Just now, Grandpa D's face had already revealed a suspicious look. He could not let anyone suspect him again, especially Bai Yanjun. Chapter 521. Therefore, he suppressed his emotions and exhaled softly. I'm just a little regretful. The same ambiguous sentence. Grandmaster D could understand many meanings in his heart. But Li Yunxin didn't give him more time to think, and immediately asked his second question. Then my second question is, he paused. I heard that your Freemasonry believes that there will be a great calamity in the world. You're not ignorant people in the secular world. Since you said so, you must think it's true. What is the great calamity? This question made Grandmaster D put away the doubt on his face. He thought for a moment and said calmly, the great calamity is the invasion of the devil realm. After saying this, he raised his hand and pointed above his head. That black rain is the rain of the devil realm, full of devil chi. Devil chi is like the spiritual power of the devil realm. It nourishes all living things in the devil realm, but it's fatal to us. The crack between the human realm and the devil realm is getting bigger and bigger, and sooner or later, Mount Yin won't be able to hold it. At that time, the gate between the devil realm and the human realm will open, and the great calamity will come. And what we need to do is to deal with it. In this inevitable calamity, we need to preserve the tinder of humanity. This explanation sounded reasonable for the people of this world. But Li Yunxin was silent for a while and said in a low voice, I know what 5 minutes means. Before this, Grandmaster D used a word. 5 minutes. Li Yunxin knew what 5 minutes meant. This meant that, at least in some aspects, he had similar experiences with Grandmaster D. This also meant that other than using words like devil realm and humanity, which were easier for the natives of this world to understand, they could also use other ways to communicate, if the man in front of him wanted to. However, Grandmaster D snorted, which seemed to be a mixture of snort and and then said, "That's all I can say. So have you thought it through?" When Li Yunxin was about to speak, Grandmaster D said, "It's okay if you haven't. Take your time to think. Settle the matter in front of you first. I'll teach you that magical power now." Li Yunxin was shocked and stunned for a moment. It was not a pleasant surprise, but more of bewilderment. This person called himself a guardian, but he was undoubtedly an elder of the Freemasons. He needed Lin Li's help for this matter, and he seemed to be interested in Lin Li's talent and wanted to recruit him. However, he also made it clear that the divine ability he was going to impart to him was extremely powerful. Once he learned it, he would either be used by him or die. Li Yunxin therefore asked him 2 questions to help him make a decision. However, when he asked the first question, this person seemed to be suspicious, but there was nothing abnormal about it. He asked the second question, but this person only said a bunch of things like devil world and devil chi. Thus, Li Yunxin reminded him that he was not a native of this world, nor was he an ignorant person. He thought that there would be another round of probing. However, she did not know what she had said wrong, nor did she know what this person was thinking. He seemed to have quickly lost interest in her, and was not even willing to speak anymore. Everything happened in the span of 2 or 3 breaths. What did she say wrong? However, Li Yunxin knew almost nothing about this person, and the information he could obtain was too little. He could not come to any definite conclusion. Thus he frowned. Up to you." Grandmaster D only said one sentence. Then he raised one hand and breathed a long breath on his palm with his mouth. The narrow room was not cold, but Grandmaster D's breath turned into frost. The white fog gathered in his palm and quickly condensed into a small ice crystal. It looked like a date pit. Ordinary date pits had lines and grooves on them, and this ice crystal also had them. They were some fine dark lines. His method was like the magic of gods in the eyes of mortals. But even Li Yunxin felt a little scared. The restriction on the floating mountain prohibited divine abilities, but this person could still make such a change. This was not a good thing. But the next moment he frowned again, because the lines on the ice crystal were slowly changing. At first they were faint lines, but they quickly spread. In just one breath the whole ice crystal turned gray. Grandmaster D held it in his palm and handed it to Li Yunxin, saying calmly, "Eat it." What a joke. Let's not talk about the origin of this thing. One breath ago, it was in someone else's mouth, and one breath later, it was being eaten by him. Li Yunxin stared. What is this? When Grandmaster D handed it to him, and he asked this question, the change on the ice crystal continued. Its color became darker, and soon, only a gloomy black was left. Black which blocked and absorbed all light. This black crystal was very similar to the black spots they saw outside. In other words, it was exactly the same. Li Yunxin took a step back and asked again, "What is this?" Grandmaster D looked at him impatiently. Without saying a word, he flipped his palm and flicked it. This black crystal immediately shot towards Li Yunxin like lightning. It should be known that this was a narrow room. The distance between Li Yunxin and Grandmaster D was only 6 or 7 steps. It was an exaggeration to say that the black crystal was as fast as lightning, but it was still faster than a bow and arrow. Li Yunxin's reaction was not slow. He raised his hand to block it. However, the black crystal passed through his palm without any hindrance. He had never encountered such a thing before, so it was too late to react. Although he closed his mouth, the black crystal went straight into his mouth. Immediately, he felt a frightening chill. In fact, Li Yunxin did not know whether it was a chill or not. Once the black crystal entered his mouth, it seemed to turn into a ball of cold flame and flowed into his meridians. Then, it went against the circulatory circle and attacked his snow mountain and ocean of chi. Whether it was a cultivator or a demon, the meridians, snow mountain and ocean of chi were extremely important and secretive things. How could it be invaded by foreign things? Without waiting for Li Yunxin to react, the demonic energy in his body had already surged up, pouncing towards the slivers of invading cold flames like a stormy sea. However, the vigorous demonic power hit nothing. Li Yunxin raised his hand to block it. His hands and feet were solid, so he might not be able to block the black crystal. But now that the black crystal had rushed into his body, the vigorous demonic power in his body was not solid, so he could not block it. The cold flame also passed through the demonic power and went straight into his snow mountain and ocean of qi. At this moment, Li Yunxin finally realized what was going on. He spat and stared at Grandpa D. "What's this?" Grandmaster D looked at him calmly and said 2 words, "Demonic seed." Demonic seed. Li Yunxin had only heard these 2 words a few times, but most of the time, she had heard them on Cloud Mountain. That wandering soul Su Yusong had explained it to him in detail, and now, this Freemason elder mentioned it again. Besides, if what he said was true, he actually implanted this so-called demonic seed into his body? Was this the magical power he said he would teach him? Li Yunxin was shocked and confused. He was about to ask again, but his expression froze. He froze on the spot. When Su Yusong told him about the demonic seed, he said that it only existed in the bodies of demons. However, the painting Saint Chen Zhao also had it. Now that Li Yunxin was a demon, he naturally had a demonic seed. But although he was said to have a demonic seed in his body, Li Yunxin had never sensed it in his body. Cultivators and demons were not ordinary people in the market. They did not even know what was in their skin. When cultivators reached a certain level, they could introspection. This so-called introspection did not mean that one could really see what was inside one's body. As for the meridians and acupoints, they didn't mean that there were tubes and spaces in the body. Even the snow mountain and ocean of qi did not mean that there was a sea and a mountain floating on the sea. These things were more about a certain state and characteristic. If one was not a cultivator and had never experienced this, it would be impossible to explain it. For example, no matter what, humans could not understand what the colors were that birds could recognize more than humans. Therefore, when Li Yunxin set up arrays in the city of Wei, he set up arrays that represented his meridians and meridians. The shape of the array might not look like a human. After that, he set up arrays in the wild forest. But naturally, the wild forest could not exactly have the shape of a human. The arrays he set up there only moved according to the qi dynamic, and did not draw a human shape. This was to say that cultivators could introspection. This introspection was to collect the essence qi and spirit, and observe the qi dynamic between the spirit and the body. Through this method of introspection, they gained an understanding of their own internal organs that was far beyond what could be achieved through seeing. Not to mention whether there were any foreign bodies in the body. They could even control which parts of the body were damaged, how they were damaged, whether they could be repaired or not, and whether they should temporarily melt the part and regenerate it. Because of this, Li Yunxin knew every corner of his body. He clearly knew, at least he thought he knew, that there was no extra space in his body for a demon seed. But today at this moment, the reason why he suddenly froze was because he saw the demon seed. There seemed to be a secret writing paper hidden in his body. Words were written in a special way on the paper, and could only be seen by special means. His body was this paper. Everything he had experienced before, including the demonic power, was clearly written on this piece of paper. As for the demon seed in his body that Su Yusong mentioned, it was the secret writing in a special way. It had been hidden before, and he did not even realize it. But now, the Freemasonry elder put another demon seed in his body. The secret writing, the demon seed hidden in his body, was finally revealed. After the cold flame finally invaded the snow mountain and ocean of qi, there seemed to be something in Li Yunxin's body suddenly opened up, something that had been sealed in the past. Now that he encountered this cold flame, the seal was removed. As mentioned before, the so-called inner vision was not really seeing what was in the body. But now, at this very moment, Li Yunxin actually saw a tiny human figure in her body with an unknown eye. It seemed to be in his brain, near the Baihui acupoint. Suddenly, a grayish space appeared. And in the middle of this space, there was a small person. The distance was too far, so he could not see it clearly. He could only vaguely make out that there were limbs and a head. All of this happened in an instant. The next moment, the space and the small person disappeared in a flash. The cold flame that had invaded his body completely covered them. The cold flame rotated slowly, and finally turned into a deep darkness. In this darkness, there was no light or sound, and it seemed like even the rules did not exist. What was this thing? What the hell was this elder of the Freemasons? How could he make this thing? Li Yunxin was shocked. But Elder D was still calm. He only glanced at his reaction, then turned his face back to the cocoon in front of him and said, "Demon seed. This thing can give you some supernatural powers. Natural supernatural powers. You don't need to cultivate them. The reason why all the demons in this world are born with supernatural powers is because of this demon seed. You are also a demon now. But you, this demon, is not your original body. Your demon seed is the dragon's gray seed. All the demons in the world are gray seeds. You saw it just now, right? It's just a gray patch. But what I gave you is a black seed." Hearing this, Li Yunxin immediately frowned. He was indeed surprised to suddenly see the original demon seed in his body. But now, listening to this person's words, he actually explained to him what a demon seed was. This seemed to mean that Su Yusong did not pass on the conversation between him and Li Yunxin and Chen Zhao's study to this elder. Maybe, at that time, the wandering souls thought that Li Yunxin was already a dead man, and felt that such a small matter did not need to be reported, so this elder did not know. This speculation made him feel at ease. Since meeting this guardian, until now, although it was only a short time, the amount of information revealed in their conversation was huge. Also, during this time, the other party seemed to have learned a lot about Li Yunxin, while Li Yunxin knew nothing about him. He had been at a disadvantage, while Elder D always had the initiative. It was as if everything was under his control, so he was calm. And the method of inserting the demon seed into Li Yunxin's body made him suffer an unprecedented loss. Ever since he started his cultivation, he had encountered many strong enemies, but he always had a way to deal with them. It had never been like today. He had been forced to eat the thing that the other party had just exhaled. But now, this speculation made Li Yunxin realize that no matter what the reason was, this guardian was not omniscient and omnipotent. The demon seed in your body is just a patch of gray. But what Li Yunxin saw was not just a patch of gray. This guardian also had things that he did not know. Chapter 522. Digong saw Li Yunxin's frown, but he thought of something else. A faint smile flashed across his face. It was hard to tell if it was a sneer. Afraid of something? You should be afraid. As he said this, he slowly reached out to touch the crack on the cocoon. Previously, he touched it to test the waters. This time, it seemed like he was really going to make a move, but his tone and expression made Li Yunxin surprised. When this person first saw Li Yunxin, his expression and words were normal. He could even be called polite. Although it was not appropriate to describe him as courteous, it was not far off. But not long ago, his attitude suddenly changed. Now, it was no different from how the wandering souls and cultivators treated Li Yunxin. It was as if he used to think that Di Fui was an important person, but now he felt that Di Fui was not important. Li Yunxin could not figure out why, so he stopped thinking about it. He carefully observed the changes in his body. This person said that the demon seed in the demon's body was the gray seed. He must be referring to the patch of gray that Li Yunxin saw in a glimpse, which was next to the pitch-black little person. He also said that he gave Li Yunxin the black seed. From his words, the black seed was more powerful than the gray seed. But based on Li Yunxin's current experience, what that person said did not seem to be false. Li Yunxin felt that he had become stronger. He had mastered more Taoist techniques and supernatural powers. It could be said that he had become stronger. The spiritual and demonic powers in his body had become denser. It could be said that he had become stronger. However, he felt that he had become stronger, but it did not seem to be these two things. It was he had become stronger in essence. It was just like how martial artists in the secular world also had inner strength and martial arts. But now, this person's body suddenly became stronger. Naturally, his inner strength and martial arts were also strengthened. His current situation was similar, but not the same. He had never experienced such a strange feeling. He could not describe it in words. But the most direct experience was that when he was fighting with the golden light, he had advanced from the realm of enlightened Jinren to the realm of advanced Jinren. This was the second stage of the true realm. Now this person had injected the black seed into his body. Although his demonic power was still suppressed by the restriction in Little Cloud Mountain, he could already feel that the demonic power in his body had become stronger. This strength far surpassed the level that a perfected enlightened master should have. If he were to boldly speculate, he would say that he had already crossed the perfected enlightened master realm and stepped into the last stage of the true state, the perfected harmony master realm. But this was really strange. The spirit chi on Cloud Mountain was indeed rich. However, the amount of demonic energy that a perfected being could contain was quite considerable. After Li Yunxin was reborn, the demonic power in his body was almost exhausted. First, he ate about 70 to 80% of the immortal fruits on the floating mountain. Then he ate a lot of pills that he plundered from the palace of Qi. Only then did he manage to recover 50 to 60% of his demon power. As for the pills in the Qi palace, what were they? It was a treasure that had been accumulated by the celestial sect for tens of thousands of years. A pill that could take years, decades, or even hundreds of years to be formed. How powerful was the spiritual power contained in it? However, these things only helped him recover half of his strength. It could be seen that even if he was in the perfected enlightened master realm, the amount of spiritual power he needed was enormous. However, he seemed to have directly jumped from the perfected enlightened master realm to the perfected harmony master realm. If the amount of spiritual power required in this period was supplemented with pills, he would probably have to eat all the pills in the Qi palace, eat again, and eat again for the third time to barely have enough. In such a short period of time, the amount of spiritual power in Little Cloud Mountain was naturally not that much. However, in his body, the black seed had forcibly raised his realm. It was as if he was originally a bucket that could hold 10 caddies of water, but only 5 caddies. Now there was not much water, but the bucket had been forcibly raised. What exactly was this black seed to have such a terrifying effect? At this moment, Gong Di continued to say, I know that you once guided the power of faith into your body in the city of Wei. He must be referring to the time when Li Yunxin was chased, and his ocean of qi and mountain of snow was sealed by the talisman puppet. As a last resort, he could only guide the power of faith into his body in order to break through the inhibition. At that time, Li Yunxin was not very clear that people could not use the power of faith, and he almost died. It was also because he knew that he would die that he took the risk to plot against the 9th young master and Lu Ling. But do you know why people can't use the power of faith? Li Yunxin was slightly stunned. Of course he had thought about this question. The answer to the question was that the ocean of qi and mountain of snow of cultivators were like a rock. And the power of faith was like sand. If sand was mixed into the rock, the structure would naturally be unstable. If too much was mixed, the ocean of qi and mountain of snow would collapse. Once this thing collapsed, people would naturally die. But Li Yunxin was clear that this was not what he was asking. It was a deeper reason why the ocean of qi and mountain of snow were like a rock, and the power of faith was like sand. Gong Di did not want to hear his answer. He continued to say, it's because of the demon seed. There is a gray seed in the body of a demon, so the power that can be used is very mixed. Without the gray seed in the body of a human, they can only use spiritual power. As for now, I've planted a black seed in your body. It's even worse than your gray seed. He paused and glanced at Li Yunxin. When there was no gray seed in your body, the introduction of the power of faith would cause your life to be in danger. Now that there is a black seed in your body, it's similar to the situation at that time. You probably can't bear the power of the black seed. His words were muffled, but Li Yunxin roughly understood what he meant. When he was a human, he could not use the exclusive power of a demon. But now he was a demon. But for a demon, the power of the black seed was like the power of a demon to a human. So now you've become stronger. You can help me clean up the mess now. Gong Di continued to look at him. But once this matter is over, you should think about whether you want to die or be used by me. Li Yunqing frowned and looked at him. After thinking for 2 breaths, he said, Did I say something that offended you? Gong Di was a smart man. He knew what Li Yunqing was asking. Why did his attitude suddenly change from respectful to arrogant? He still gave a vague snort. I suddenly realized that you are not the person I'm looking for. Now do something. Help me hold this thing open. This sentence made Li Yunqing's heart skip a beat. His speculation seemed to have been confirmed. He was not the person Bai Yanjun was looking for. And now, this person thought he was also the person he was looking for, but because of one or a few of his words, he was also disappointed. Did this mean that Bai Yanjun and this person were both looking for the same person, or the same kind of person? But at this moment, he saw that Gong Di's hands had already reached into the black crack on the cocoon. It seemed that Gong Di had fumbled inside for a while, then exerted some strength to slightly expand the crack. The walls, floor, and ceiling of this room had originally been emitting a faint white light. But now that the crack had been expanded, red light immediately shone out. The red light seemed to be emitted by the thing inside the cocoon, and that thing seemed to have a life of its own, dancing wildly. For a moment, the room turned from bright white to dark red, as if there were many demons and ghosts wandering around, looking like a domain. Li Yunqing hesitated for a while, but finally walked over. No matter what had happened just now, he believed in his previous judgment, that the black rain was extremely dangerous. Many things could be discussed later, but this matter had to be solved first. This so-called guardian was also sure that he would recognize this reality, so his attitude was so fearless. In the past, Li Yunqing was not afraid of death, because there were many things that had to be done when the arrow was knocked on the bow. That was why he explored dangerous situations unrestrainedly, and insisted on fighting against the heavens. But now, if he were to perish together with this person just because of this person's disrespectful attitude, he did not care about the death of others. But he himself would die with grievance, and no one would know about his heroic reputation. He was not willing to do this kind of business. In the past, he was the one who caused others to suffer in silence, but he did not expect that he would fall into such a trap. He looked at Grandpa D's meaning, and guessed that he should take over and continue to open the crack. Now that things had come to this, there was no point in thinking too much. Moreover, he was half a cat, so he was extremely curious, and wanted to see what the formation set by the legendary celestial being looked like. So he stretched out his hands. As expected, when his hands were about to touch the crack, Grandpa D said to him in a deep voice, "Use your demon power." In the past, in this Mount Shaoran, demon power could be used in the body, but it could not be fully used. Now that he heard this, Li Yunqing tried to use his snow mountain and ocean of qi, but it was good. Originally, his power was confined, but now, the black seed had invaded the snow mountain and ocean of qi, and that place was originally covered by the cold flame. When he used his power again, the cold flame instantly mixed with the demon power, and ran a big circle. Then, it gushed out from every meridian and aperture, as if it was plated with a layer of outer shell for Li Yunqing. It was hard to see with the naked eye, but the most direct observation was that Li Yunqing's hands were holding the crack, because of the layer of cold flame that covered his whole body. When he held it, Grandpa D let go. Instantly, he felt an extremely strong force coming. The crack was about to close. It was as if he was holding two mountains, and the force was endless, not even giving him a chance to breathe. Li Yunqing's heart skipped a beat. He saw that Grandpa D opened the crack effortlessly, but he felt that he could not even hold it for 2 breaths. How strong was Grandpa D exactly? At this moment, Grandpa D shouted, "Open!" It was easy for him to open it, but it was difficult for Li Yunqing to do it. It was more than difficult. With his current ability, it was impossible. However, at the moment when he used up all his strength, and the crack was about to close, Grandpa D shouted again, "Come!" Because of this shout, 10 red light spots of different sizes suddenly flew out from the crack that was about to close. These light spots seemed to be created by some magic, and each of them was in the shape of a hexagon with distinct edges and corners. Once they arrived in front of Grandpa D, they immediately lined up in a circle and stopped 3 feet in front of him. At this moment, the crack was about to close, but Grandpa D raised his hand, and his fingers were like the wind. He pointed at the 10 light spots for more than 10 times. Every time his fingers touched the light spots shone brightly. It was as if the formation was responding to the spiritual power in his hands, and the light shone brightly. At this moment, Li Yunxin's attention was focused on the crack, and he did not pay much attention to Grandpa D's actions. But he also noticed that Grandpa D's fingers were very orderly, and should be following some kind of pattern. It was more like he was setting up a formation. After he pointed at the light spots for more than 10 times, he shouted again in a low voice, "Hold it in!" Before Li Yunxin could understand what he meant, he suddenly felt as if an electric current had passed through his body. The cold flames that were emitted by the black seeds circulated on the surface of his body, forming a shell. Now it felt as if something had been mixed into the cold flames, and with a loud boom, it had expanded him. This bigger did not mean that his body had become bigger. It was more like his perception and strength had become bigger. It was as if he had become a balloon, and now someone blew a big breath of air into his body, causing him to suddenly swell up. Cultivators always understood their own bodies very well. When did they ever have such a strange and indescribable feeling? Even though Li Yunxin was worried about the black rain, he was also shocked at this moment. He wanted to let go of his hand and hide to the side to get rid of this strange feeling. But it was too late. His body was no longer under the control of his own consciousness. He wanted to retract his hand and escape, but his hands suddenly exerted force. The newly obtained terrifying power suddenly opened the crack that previously made him feel as heavy as a mountain. As soon as the crack opened, it immediately revealed the flowing red light inside. It was originally a black line, but now it was expanded into the shape of a jujube seed. It looked like it was as if a blood-red eye suddenly opened, and there were many eyeballs that were emitting red light in this eye. Seeing this terrifying scene, even though Li Yunxin was a demon and had seen many things, he could not help but be shocked. But this was not the most shocking thing. The moment the cocoon was torn open, a soundless but extremely sharp hissing sound exploded. It exploded in the cocoon in the room, and also in his body, spirit, and the entire space. It was as if a hurricane that could destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth was attacking him, and his soul and body were like a withered tree in the wilderness of this hurricane. The strong wind blew against his face, and his thin body could not protect his spirit at all, so there was a buzzing sound in his consciousness. Li Yunxin's vision suddenly widened. It was as if that sharp hissing sound had shaken his spirit out of his body, and in just a moment, he did not know how far it had flown. If his spirit was really blown away, outside this narrow room was the Palace of Qi. Outside the Palace of Qi was the floating mountain, and outside the floating mountain was the little cloud mountain, and the cloud mountain. He should have been able to see this scene, but now his vision suddenly widened, and he saw that Grandpa D turned his head and said something to his body, then raised his hand and pointed at the spot of light. Suddenly he fell into a void. However, this void was not completely empty. If one looked carefully, there seemed to be countless stars moving, as if they were dancing in a pot of boiling water. This moment was very short, but in his consciousness it seemed to be very long. However, Li Yunxin's thoughts also became slow, and he could not think of any valuable ideas in a short time. Then the void suddenly disappeared, and there was a chaotic scene in front of him. Li Yunxin finally saw something that could be understood. Now he did not know whether the him, at this moment, was a spirit or something else. But if he had a body, his eyes would definitely be wide open at this moment, because he saw a familiar person. The scene in front of him was a boiling red sea. It was as if the ground was covered with lava, and there was no place for him to step. In this sea of lava, there were countless things that looked like humans, but their faces could not be seen clearly, jumping out and falling back. It was as if many small people formed by lava wanted to get rid of this sea of lava, but were always unable to do so. But this was not what surprised him. What surprised him was that there was a long spear in this sea of lava. The reason why he knew it was a spear was because the spear's head was facing up, inserted in the sea of lava. And it was very big. It was so big that the spear's shaft was as thick as half an adult man's body. And the reason why he knew this was because there was indeed a person pierced through the spear. That person was dressed in black. His tongue was very long, hanging down and stuck to the spear shaft. He was pierced through by the spear, as if someone had stabbed him to death, and then placed his corpse here to show others. So his eyes were wide open, and did not close even in death. Li Yunxin did not have much contact with him, but he recognized him. Black Llama King. Chapter 523. Was this a dream? Cultivators were clear-minded and rarely dreamed. The few dreams that Li Yunxin had in this life were all due to special reasons. But if it was not a dream, he could not believe what he was seeing. The Black Llama King was dead. What about Bai Yanjun? Where was this place? Could it be the Sunluo Temple? Just like when he was traversing through the void earlier. It was a very short time, but it felt like a long time had passed. These thoughts only spun in his head for a second before the scene in front of him changed horribly. All of a sudden, all the flaming figures that jumped out of the boiling magma opened an eye at the same time. This eye opened in the middle of the figure's body and almost occupied the entire torso. It emitted a red glow and looked very much like the thing in the cocoon that Grandpa D asked him to tear open. They stared at Li Yunxin at the same time, causing him to feel numb all over. Then he heard a neat wind-like scream. "Save me!" The sharp scream was like a fierce wind sweeping through the gap, almost piercing one's eardrums. Li Yunxin had a splitting headache. He felt as if every inch of his skin was being cut by a sharp knife. His consciousness shrank violently. Everything in front of him flew far away. After that long and short void, he returned to the narrow room. At this time, he saw Grandpa D's fingers still jumping on the tin light spots. But the thing in the cocoon looked completely different. There were countless red lights flowing before, but now the red lights had completely dissipated. Only a shiny iron ball was left. It was extremely smooth, and its surface faithfully reflected everything in the narrow room, including his slightly panicked face. Li Yunxin's hands were still holding the crack. But now that he regained control of his body, he immediately stopped and jumped 2 steps back. "What did you do to me?" But there was no need for him to hold it anymore. The crack didn't close up but slowly disappeared. It was as if an invisible hand had zipped up the shiny iron ball and wrapped it up again. "You're done here." Grandmaster D's fingers danced on the light spots for the last few times before he clenched his fist and pounded heavily on the ring that was surrounded by 10 light spots. Thus, they all turned into streams of light and disappeared into the void. Then he turned to look at Li Yunxin. "What did you see?" Li Yunxin hesitated for a moment. Instead of answering, he asked, "What is this?" He raised his hand and pointed at the cocoon. "Is this the formation left by the celestial being?" The reason why he asked this was because he was too familiar with the appearance of the eye on the cocoon. It was the same as the eye on the little people that leaped out of the magma sea. He was astonished by it. Perhaps he knew nothing of what he had been through before. But at least it was still within common sense. He didn't know, but he could guess. But now what he had seen and experienced could no longer be judged by common sense. Since he didn't answer, Gongzidi didn't seem to want to ask anymore. The elder of the Freemasons let out a long breath. His expression had already relaxed. He looked at Li Yunxin up and down. "It seems that you really don't know." Judging from his tone, it seemed that Li Yunxin should know. "Since you don't know, you don't have to say more. So, do you want to go with me?" Li Yunxin hesitated for a moment. Grandmaster D sneered. "Then forget it. As for the demons outside, their doomsday is coming." Saying this, he clapped his hands and shouted in a low voice, "It's open." The originally bright white cocoon closed up and was spinning slowly. Now that it heard these 2 words, it immediately sped up. In just a moment, it turned into a ball of light, illuminating the room as if it were daytime. Then Grandmaster D shook his head. "I thought you were a promising person. But unfortunately, We are not the same kind of people. If you say that this thing is a formation left by the celestial being, it is true. In fact, the black seed I put into your body can be regarded as something from the celestial being. But, since it is something from the celestial being, you should use the power of the celestial being. Mortals don't have the chance to experience the power of the celestial being. But today, you will probably have the honor. In a moment, it would fill the room. The black seed in your body is like a new snow mountain and ocean of chi. It will guide the spiritual power into it. Grandmaster D paused and laughed. But it is also like your previous body introduced the power of wish. You have no way to digest this power. You will probably die from bloating. Li Yunxin, enjoy the feeling of being a powerhouse. After saying this, he suddenly took a step back. Although Li Yunxin didn't understand, he knew that the words he left behind were not good. Now that things had come to this, even if there was a huge difference in strength between them, how could he let him go? With a muffled groan, he raised his hand to catch him. However, when Grandmaster D took a step back, he suddenly hit the wall. Then, as if the wall was made of water, his whole body sank into it. Escaping through the wall was not a brilliant technique. Li Yunxin could use it easily. However, now that he was on Mount Shaoyan, it was impossible for him to use this magical power again. His fingers didn't manage to catch Grandmaster D, but touched the wall. With a bang, the whole room buzzed, but the wall didn't break. When Grandmaster D hid, the wall was as solid as water. But when Li Yunxin touched it, it was indestructible. His heart tightened. If the wall of this narrow room couldn't be broken, wouldn't he be trapped alive in here? Therefore, without any hesitation, he raised his hand and punched again. This time, the strength of the punch was even greater. A deafening roar reverberated through the entire room, causing his bones to buzz and the surface of his fists to almost crack. But because of this, Li Yunxin was stunned. He didn't punch for the third time, because the second punch was too powerful. Previously, he wanted to catch Grandmaster D, so he naturally had to use all his strength. However, the strength of his first punch with all his strength was only half of this second punch. When the second punch was used, even with his strong demon body, he still felt pain on his fist. It showed how powerful it was. This meant, Li Yunxin slowly turned around, took a deep breath, and looked at the room that had turned into a ball of flowing light. When Grandmaster D left, he didn't feel anything. But now, only 3 breaths had passed, terrifying power was released from the cocoon continuously. Therefore, at this moment, Li Yunxin realized that when they came in, this thing should have stopped spinning. And now it was the way it should be. Before Grandmaster D left, he said that the power contained in this cocoon, or core, was the spiritual power used by Deva. And the black seed in Li Yunxin's body was like the snow mountain and ocean of qi that could absorb this spiritual power. It would continuously absorb this power into his body, and he would become stronger and stronger, until he exploded. This statement was scary enough, but it was scary on the basis that Grandmaster D's prediction was correct. He said that there was only a gray seed in Li Yunxin's body, but he didn't know that there was a black human figure in his body. Although he couldn't see it with his inner vision, Li Yunxin could clearly remember the scene at that time. The so-called gray race and black race might sound clueless and hard to understand, but Li Yunxin felt that it was just a different way of saying another power system. It looked scary, strange, and unfathomable, but once it was sorted out, maybe it was still within the scope of his understanding. For example, among the mortal warriors, there was also talk about the conception and governing vessels, and the qi circulation. If the spiritual power of the cultivators was poured into their bodies, they would also explode and die. But if one understood the method of cultivation and slowly understood the principles behind it, he would find that in essence, there was no difference between the cultivation of the mortal warriors. They all used various methods to refine their essence, qi, and spirit. Since Grandmaster D compared the black seed to the snow mountain and ocean of qi, it meant that the two must have something in common. As long as he could find something in common, he might be able to escape. After calming himself down, he dared to carefully observe the cocoon. When Grandmaster D was here, he carefully restrained his mind to prevent any unexpected problems. Only now did he have the mood to study this thing again. If this was the magic array left by the celestial beings, what Grandmaster D did to this magic array just now was to repair this thing. Although it looked like he only touched some spots of light, it was definitely not as easy as it looked. There were many red lights in the cocoon. The red lights looked very strange at first, but now that he thought about it, it felt a little familiar. Li Yunxin had always been a very smart person. If something felt familiar to him, he would definitely be able to think of the source. But now he couldn't think of what he had seen that made him feel familiar. Perhaps it was because, after seeing the red lights in the cocoon, he was inexplicably shaken to the place where the Black King of Hell died by the scream. Then, he saw even more unbelievable and incomprehensible scenes, and more similar eyes. That was why he couldn't distinguish it. However, after he tried to touch it with his divine sense for a while, he realized that this cocoon was not something that he could pry into. Now, the room was filled with majestic spiritual power. It was as if there were 10,000 experts at the peak of the Grand Supreme Realm trapped in this cocoon, desperately releasing an extremely oppressive aura in all directions. And these spiritual powers and auras were desperately drilling into his body. Previously, Grandmaster D said that his power was not enough to help, so he inserted the black seed into his body. He forcefully pushed his realm to the last level of the true state, the perfect harmony realm. Now he was like an empty bucket. The spiritual power overflowed in the room and flowed into his bucket. When he punched the second time, the power was so strong that he couldn't bear it. It was because the spiritual power in his body had skyrocketed, and he couldn't digest it in time. After all, he was a dragon's. He wasn't an animal that first gained spiritual intelligence and then cultivated the Tao fruit. If one were to look into it, it was not appropriate to classify dragons as any of the three types of demons. However, if one had to say, they were somewhat similar to ghost cultivators. The true bodies of dragons, the god-fiend bodies, and the incarnations were actually condensed from demonic power. Therefore, when his realm increased, his body should also be remodeled. Only when the endlessly surging demonic power in his body was remodeled into a more powerful dragon body would the upgrade and transformation be completed. However, now that he was in Mount Shaoyan, his supernatural power was restricted. At this moment, there was no way for him to reveal his god-fiend body or true body to complete this remodeling. Therefore, although his body contained a terrifying amount of spiritual energy, his physical body wasn't strong enough to match this spiritual power. Grandmaster D was right. If he was a cultivator, his realm would be forcefully raised, and he absorbed so much spiritual energy in a short period of time. If he didn't have enough time to slowly temper his physical body, he would explode at any moment. However, he was a demon, and his body was extremely strong. He could hold on for a while longer than an ordinary person. Even so, he soon felt the scorching heat. This heat came from both the divine soul and the physical body. This was the sign of the overload of spiritual power in his body. The spiritual power suddenly had nowhere to go, so it repeatedly surged in his body. It made him feel that he had all the power in his body, but nowhere to vent it. He really wanted to smash something. And all this happened within the time of 5 breaths. However, the most terrible thing was that this kind of power, that even perfected Jinren Li Yunxin couldn't withstand, seemed to be just a little bit of insignificant power that escaped from the cocoon when it was spinning at high speed. This thing, if it was really an array left by a celestial, how strong would it be? However, after another 3 breaths, Li Yunxin really felt that something was wrong. He originally thought that Grandmaster D only calculated that there was a gray seed in his body, but not that human form. Therefore, he felt that this was a variable, and he could slowly find a way to deal with it. Even if he couldn't find it, he could go out first and think about it later. His little finger contained so many treasures in the Xianmen. How could he not be able to protect himself temporarily? He didn't expect things to happen so fast. He was shocked because of this. After all, the spiritual power in his body had surged to the extreme and reached the peak of the realm of truth. He raised his fist and punched the wall. However, the wall didn't move at all. Instead, The sound waves caused by the punch made him bleed from all his orifices. What the hell is this thing? It doesn't have any spells, but it can't even break the dragons at the peak of the realm of truth. How can there be such a tough person in the world? In a hurry, he punched 5 more times. Every punch was with all his strength, and it was also to vent the spiritual power in his body. This could temporarily alleviate the crisis in his body, and it finally had some effect. The wall was punched, and a small crack appeared. Within the crack, there were inconspicuous, extremely tiny fragments that flew everywhere due to the tremendous force. At that moment, Li Yunxin was so anxious that he couldn't have noticed that there were a few pieces that shot towards the cocoon like arrows after being shaken up by the tip of his fist. The crack that Li Yunxin punched out was very small, and so were the pieces. The biggest one was only a speck of dust. Therefore, once it entered the ball of light, it disappeared without a trace, as if it had never been there. And the light cocoon continued to spin. It only paused slightly, and the strong light in the room flickered slightly, but Li Yunxin couldn't notice this degree of flickering. Chapter 524. At this moment, not only could Li Yunxin not perceive the details, but he could not even perceive the subtle sensations in his body. His body gradually became numb, like the numbness brought about by overfilling his blood. Boundless power filled every crevice in his body, trying to find an outlet to vent it out. Previously, he had raised his fist and punched the wall. It was a subconscious action in a moment of desperation. In fact, a more rational approach would have been to check the magic treasure in his little finger, find a suitable item, and escape. But it seemed that this subconscious action, purely to vent his anger, had saved his life. Power filled his body so quickly that it soon approached the critical point. His body had not been tempered again, so it was unlikely that it could withstand such a majestic spiritual power. But with every punch, some of the spiritual power in his body poured out. It was as if he was a bucket full of water, which was still pouring in. But if he could scoop some out bit by bit, the moment when he exploded would come later. But in the end, that moment still had to come. Only a dozen breaths had passed since Grandpa D left. Li Yunxin's muscles, bones, skin, and flesh had reached their limits and could no longer support it. Terrifying transformations began to take place. His face and limbs began to distort. Even the space around him began to distort. Many colors and sceneries appeared and withered like epiphyllum, but they were also distorted and hideous. But another change also appeared at this moment. He felt that in his perception, or maybe it was just an illusion, the whole world flickered for a moment. He always had a sense of alienation from this world. This sense of alienation might be because of his special background, or because of his special constitution. He had experienced many things, but he always felt that he was a bystander. As a stranger in a foreign land, he could not be familiar with some people and things. But at this moment, he seemed to be embedded with this world. A black light suddenly flashed in his divine sense. Previously, when Grandpa D injected the black seed into his body, the cold flame flowed against the meridians, allowing him to see his gray seed for a moment. At this moment he saw it again, but this time it was clearer. The gray void once again appeared in the range of his divine sense. It seemed that because of the abundant spiritual power in his body, the details in this void were clearer. At this moment, Li Yunxin was examining it with his divine sense, so there wasn't much of a problem of looking carefully or paying attention. What he saw was what he thought. There was nothing that he could overlook. Now that it was clear, more details could be seen. The black humanoid figure in the center had his own face. This was to be expected, and there was nothing surprising about it. However, the black figure's movements were a little strange. His hands and feet were tightly wrapped around his torso, as if he had been tied up. However, his expression was very solemn. The gray void around the figure made Li Yunxin shocked and stunned. There was an image in the gray void. Although it was only a silhouette, it was clear that it was a mountain. There seemed to be a courtyard on the mountain peak, and there were a few houses in the courtyard. Be it the mountain peak or the courtyard, they were all very familiar. It was his temporary imperial residence. Li Yunxin had always thought that the temporary imperial residence of a demon was strange. They appeared too abruptly, and seemed out of place in this world. Although the magical powers in the world were magical, there was still a clear cultivation system. However, there was no other explanation for the temporary imperial residence other than the saying, when a demon's cultivation reaches a certain level, he can create a temporary imperial residence. But now, could it be related to this demon's demon seed? Thinking quickly, he realized that this speculation was not without reason. There were two things that seemed to be unique to demons, the demon seed, and the temporary imperial residence. Now he saw the image of the mountain peak, and the courtyard in his temporary imperial residence on the gray seed that Gong Di mentioned. Could it be that these two things were just different manifestations of the same thing? However, he remembered something else. Su Wing had sneaked into his temporary imperial residence and refined Lu Ling's 6 Desires tribulation body inside. Previously, Li Yunxin was deeply afraid of him because of this. He could actually sneak into someone else's temporary imperial residence. Previously, he was puzzled and did not know how he did it. But now that he knew that the temporary imperial residence was related to the demon seed, could it be that there was something mysterious about it? His physical body was now on the verge of collapse, but his thoughts were running much faster than usual. After thinking about so many things in a split second, the change had just begun. The black figure that looked like him suddenly trembled and suddenly swelled up. It was very similar to what he looked like now. His body was filled with spiritual power and swelled up. When the black figure swelled up, the pressure on his physical body suddenly decreased. It was as if there was a decompression valve at the bottom of the bucket, and now it was finally opened. The surging power found a new outlet. It poured into the black figure in his divine sense like an avalanche. This figure was like a bottomless pit. The spiritual power that almost made Li Yunxin explode only made him swell up. Then it stopped changing, but the face became clearer and fuller. After a while, the black seed that Grandmaster D put into his body also gathered. Cold flames wrapped around the body of this small black figure, as if putting on a black armor for him. Everything happened very quickly. Li Yunxin's divine sense seemed to have witnessed the whole process, but he also felt that it happened in the blink of an eye. He really wanted to see this small figure clearly, and he really wanted to understand what the void and the small figure represented. These two things were tangible. Tangible meant that it was not the origin. Therefore, he moved his divine sense closer, wanting to take a closer look. However, once he did so, the black figure seemed to have an attraction force. It sucked his divine sense into its body, just like how it absorbed the spiritual power. Intelligence was not something that had a material form. When a person's consciousness or attention was attracted to a certain place, there was no difference between there or not there. Therefore, at this moment, Li Yunxin's gaze stayed in the body of this small figure for a short while, and he saw another strange scene. In fact, the body of this small figure, which looked like him, was more like a human-shaped window than a person. And he looked through this window. What he saw was a brilliant sea of stars. The silver sea was brilliant, and there were countless bright stars. However, the sea of stars that Li Yunxin saw was a ghastly sight. Enormous clusters of light were blossoming all over the sky, spreading out in all directions. It was as if countless stars had exploded, leaving only such a magnificent but poignant scene. This vast void and destruction made his heart palpitate. A feeling of insignificance and loneliness grew and spread in a corner, like a huge hand suddenly grabbing his heart. Although he had experienced these two feelings more deeply than most people, Li Yunxin suddenly felt terrified and helpless. He was so frightened that he almost broke out in a sweat. Because of this shock, his divine sense suddenly retreated. He found that he had fallen to the ground. He was still in the narrow room, but the wall in front of him had a gap that was as wide as a person's width. He did not know how many punches he had unconsciously punched when he was temporarily absent-minded. The cocoon was still spinning, but the light that it emitted was becoming calmer. This stable and bright white light was similar to the sunlight that he saw on the floating mountain. Since this thing was driving the cloud mountain, perhaps The heavenly light he saw was indeed emitted by this thing. Although the light had become calmer, the spiritual power contained in it was still strong. But at this moment, when Li Yunxin bathed in this spiritual power, he only felt that his body was full and his spirit was harmonious. He did not feel full at all. Inside his body, the small figure that was surrounded by cold flames was absorbing all the spiritual power that he could not absorb. Not only did it save his life, but it also allowed him to adjust his breath in this extremely rich spiritual power. Before he came here, he was still in the advanced realm of Jinren, and the demonic power in his body was almost full. But now he was in the perfect realm of Jinren. No, he was at the peak of the realm of truth, and his demonic power was also at the peak of the realm of truth. The black seed that Grandmaster D had inserted into his body had raised his realm. The elder of the Freemasonry had originally looked up to him, but later on, because of one sentence or a few sentences that went wrong, his attitude suddenly became cold. More importantly, he had left him alone in this narrow room to wait for death. If there was only the gray seed in Li Yunxin's body, and not another strange human form that he did not know about, he would have exploded from the terrible power. Now this cultivation paradise was going to become his burial ground. When he first met Grandmaster D, he did not have a bad impression of him. His way of talking was also neutral and peaceful, and he seemed to be different from those wandering souls and cultivators. But he did not expect that he would change his attitude faster than turning the page of a book. In the blink of an eye, he had fallen into a dangerous situation. From this, it could be seen that those who were related to the Freemasonry were probably not good people. Li Yunxin adjusted his breath for a while, and then stood up. This was indeed a good place. If he cultivated here, he would probably advance by leaps and bounds. However, since the elder of the Freemasonry had appeared on the floating mountain, it meant that he could not stay here for long. Originally, he wanted to find a way to destroy this core and destroy the lair of the Taoist sect of wonders. But now, he knew that this so-called core and Cloud Mountain seemed to be equally important and guarded something. Although he did not completely believe this, it was not good to gamble on something of this level. Thus, he decided to get out of this narrow room and take a look at the situation outside before deciding whether to continue ambushing the two wandering souls or to leave quickly. The hole in the wall of the narrow room that he had blasted was like a flash of lightning, or the side of a person's face. There was a faint white light on the wall, but it was pitch black in the gap, and he could not see the way out. He hesitated for a while, but finally took a deep breath and jumped into the gap. It was dark in front of him, but then it lit up. The world suddenly reversed. When he jumped in, it was a horizontal jump, but in an instant, it became a fall. In front of him was a ground covered with broken bricks and tiles. He hurriedly exerted some strength in his legs and stood firm. This place was still the floating mountain. It should be the original Qi Hall. But the entire Qi Hall was gone, along with a large number of buildings nearby. Before he and Grandpa D entered the narrow room, the black spots were falling and eroding most of the roof of the Qi Hall. The destruction might have continued after that, but the black rain that had disappeared now, should not have caused such destruction. It was as if a giant had ruthlessly slashed down from the top of Little Cloud Mountain. The Qi Hall, along with the halls to the east and west, were all destroyed and razed to the ground. This slash mark was very long. At least, from where Li Yunxin stood, he could not see the end of it. What did this? He had spent a few nights on Little Cloud Mountain, and knew that although there was no moon on Little Cloud Mountain, there was a very beautiful watery moonlight. But he did not know if it was an illusion. But the moonlight tonight was a little dimmer than usual. Li Yunxin subconsciously looked up at the top of the sky, and was stunned. On the top of Little Cloud Mountain, there was a huge crack. The huge crack was in the shape of lightning, and also looked like the side of a person's face. It traversed half of the sky. And this crack on the ground, which came from the Qi Hall, seemed to be one with the crack on the top of the sky. Something had slashed in this direction. Originally, it had slashed on the side walls of Little Cloud Mountain, but the floating mountain was in the middle of Little Cloud Mountain, blocking it. Li Yunxin opened his mouth, and his mind was completely sluggish, although it was only for a moment. The crack on the top of the sky, why did it look so familiar? A few breaths ago, he had seen it with his own eyes. It was the crack that he had blasted on the wall of that narrow room. Could it be because of the formation, that the damage he had caused in the room had been projected onto this little cloud mountain? Once this thought appeared in his mind, many details immediately surged into his mind like waves. At that time, he had been in the same narrow room with Grandmaster D. Because of Grandmaster D's abnormal behavior, he had almost focused all his attention on Grandmaster D. Therefore, although he had noticed some details in that room, he did not take them to heart. Now that he thought about it, he felt that there were many things that he had a vague impression of, but he could not be sure. Even so, a very bold idea appeared in Li Yunxin's mind. He had to confirm this idea. Without hesitation, he turned around and ran towards the entrance of the narrow room from which Grandmaster D had entered. There was originally an iron platform there. Only after Grandmaster D had smashed open the iron platform did the entrance appear. Now the iron platform had been completely flattened and had become a discus. But now, Li Yunxin was at the peak of the true state and was full of demonic power. Among all the famous demons and cultivators in the world, there were not many who could defeat him in a head-on clash with their physical bodies. Therefore, he used a little force and opened the thick and big iron cover. It did not take him much effort to find the entrance. It was still a narrow hole, which looked gloomy under the shadow of the iron cover. But when he took a deep breath and jumped down again, he stepped on solid ground. Grandmaster D jumped down and immediately entered the narrow room. Now he was completely at a wrong place. There was a common legend in the secular world about a person who mistakenly entered the immortal mountain and obtained a fated chance. But when he wanted to go again, he could not enter. This feeling was actually experienced by him today, but he was already mentally prepared for this. If the entrance could really be found by flipping open the iron platform, it would have been discovered long ago. So he had to take a risky move. After hesitating for only 3 breaths, he shrank his body and simply sat in the hole. Then, he pulled his hand and covered himself with the huge iron cover. Many details were indeed seen by one person, but at that time, he did not pay attention, so he did not remember it. But this "did not remember" usually meant that he did not pay attention to it on the surface. The details were still in his mind. He was just waiting for a fated chance day, when his subconscious was suddenly touched, and then the details would pop out. In the past, he used hypnosis to make many people remember things that they did not know. Now, he decided to use it on himself again. From the decision to the execution, it only took him 6 breaths. It was not easy to hypnotize oneself, especially for someone like him. However, with the help of 1 or 2 magic treasures that were especially good at illusions, he sat upright in the shadow and slowly exhaled for the 23rd time. Then he succeeded. The details reappeared. Although many of them were incomplete and blurred and distorted, due to the influence of his subjective consciousness at that time, more of these details could still be compared from different angles, and he could still restore the scene he saw at that time. There was indeed something fishy about that wall. If Li Yunxin had not seen the Huangyu Heavenly Sutra, nor was he a person with great cultivation and keen observation skills, it would be impossible for him to understand what exactly the picture formed by these shadows was. However, he had previously obtained the Huangyu Heavenly Diagram, and because he wanted to unlock the secret of the formation that sealed the Golden Rock King, he had spent a lot of effort to figure out the crypts that were distributed among the countries and the distribution of spiritual power near the crypts. Now that he saw this thing again, many places matched with his previous analysis and observations. How could he not know what it was? As the saying goes, fortune and misfortune come hand in hand. Previously, he was trapped here by Grandpa D and almost died. However, he saw such a treasure. And the reason why it was considered a treasure was because, previously, he wanted to figure out what the various crypts on the Huangyu Heavenly Sutra corresponded to. And to figure this out, he had to first figure out the circulation of qi, and the distribution of spiritual power around them. However, in reality, the mountains and rivers near the crypts crisscrossed, and they were closely related to the influence of people. It would take more than one person and a day to figure it out. Therefore, Li Yunxin had given up this idea and realized that the key to unlocking the secret of the Huangyu Heavenly Sutra should be in the translucent jade slip. Therefore, he planned to take back the jade slip. Unexpectedly, in that narrow room, someone had already marked out the distribution of spiritual power on the map. Perhaps he could use a long time to recall these contents in his subconscious. However, now that he had fallen into his own consciousness and was on this floating mountain, there was no one around to protect him. Doing such a dangerous thing in an environment full of dangers, he couldn't stay for too long. Thus, after a few breaths of time, he opened his eyes in the darkness, a little dazed. He spent a long time in a daze, thinking hard about something. Then, he slowly spat out some unknown scales and words in a vague and low voice. Finally, his speech became clearer, and his eyes became clearer. About a quarter of an hour later, he took a deep breath, as if he was convulsing, and completely woke up. He took the risk to travel through the world of his consciousness. In fact, it was possible that he would never wake up. But this time he succeeded. It was half a success. After waking up, he forgot most of what he had just seen, but he still retained some key things. At least now, he knew roughly what the Guanyuan crypt, where hatred's lair was located, and what the circulation of spiritual power around it looked like. And he also knew part of the secret of this little cloud mountain. This so-called little cloud mountain was actually a miniature world of reality. It was impossible for people who saw Little Cloud Mountain for the first time to come to this conclusion. There was a vast forest on the ground of Little Cloud Mountain, and there was a winding river in between. This kind of layout, no matter what, could not be related to a world, which world would only have one river. But the reason why Li Yunxin could see through this secret was because of 2 points. After he escaped from the narrow room, he saw the crack. That crack was the faithful reaction and projection of the one he left on the narrow room's wall. On the wall of the narrow room, what was drawn was the layout of spiritual power in the vast real world, which also meant that there was a similar layout in Little Cloud Mountain. In other words, that narrow room seemed to be something that could control this Little Cloud Mountain. For example, he once drew the 100 miles of rivers and mountains painting near the city of Wei. If his magical power was great enough and his realm high enough, he could theoretically use this painting to affect reality. Of course, that was just a theory he deduced based on his understanding of painting. But today, he really encountered such a thing. If this thing was real, how did it come about? This thought once ran to the art saint Chen Zhao. After all, the principle behind this was different from painting. But he quickly denied himself. Cloud Mountain appeared 50,000 years ago. Long before the art saint appeared in this world, these things had already existed. If he didn't think about these questions for the time being, the crack in the narrow room was faithfully projected into this Little Cloud Mountain. Then the thing in Little Cloud Mountain, would it also be projected into the real world? This thought made Li Yunxin slowly exhale a breath of cold air. If it was real, it meant that there was a huge crack that was almost 1/3 the length of the whole world, and as wide as a country outside Cloud Mountain. This thought shocked him, but he quickly denied it, because he still remembered that when he first came to Little Cloud Mountain, he jumped straight down from the cliff. Such a huge force not only destroyed a few trees, but also blasted a deep hole in the ground. If the changes that happened on Little Cloud Mountain were also faithfully reflected in the real world, then the crater that he had created at that time would probably be the size of the Yu Kingdom. Moreover, he and Su Sheng had destroyed so many pavilions along the way. If such a thing really happened, Su Sheng would definitely stop him. When Li Yunxin thought of this, he actually felt a headache coming on. He had long thought that there would be many secrets on Cloud Mountain, but he didn't think that there would be so many unimaginable secrets. People said that the immortals created Cloud Mountain and left behind an array to drive Cloud Mountain, to move on the earth, to protect the human world. But now, how could it be so easy? The connection between the narrow room and Little Cloud Mountain must mean something. Those so-called gray and black seeds should also be related to these things. There were many magical powers in this world, spiritual power, demonic power, and all kinds of cultivation methods. In the past, Li Yunqin thought that these things were profound theories in this world that could deeply explain the nature and laws of the world. But now that he had walked around Cloud Mountain, he realized the Tao and theories that he, as well as those cultivators and demons knew, were just fleeting shadows. They only knew what they were but didn't know why. The true essence, the inside story, was related to the mysterious connection between the narrow room and Little Cloud Mountain. It was related to the gray seeds and black seeds. It was related to the sea of lava that he had seen before, the Black Yama King on the spear. He only knew a little about this world. He only knew a little about it. The only thing he could do now was to temporarily store these thoughts. Then he raised his hand to lift the iron cover above his head and jumped out of the hole. The Qi Hall was already at the edge of the floating mountain. He could see the forest below the floating mountain if he walked quickly for a while. He had stayed in the forest for a few days and had a battle of wits with Exa and Shilio. During that time, he had naturally tried to set up arrays while walking. But because his spiritual power was restricted, he couldn't form an array. But because of this, he had long discovered that there were some differences in the forest. For example, in the forest, the spiritual power wasn't abundant everywhere, but there were different levels of it. This was very common in the real world. For example, the spiritual power near the city of Wei was abundant, but in the wild forest 100 miles away, it was thinner. And further south, in the June Mountain area, the spiritual power was abundant again. But the difference was in the scale. In the real world, the uneven distribution was measured in units of a few miles, dozens of miles, or hundreds of miles. But this Little Cloud Mountain was only a few hundred miles wide. And it wasn't formed naturally but was man-made. But on such a small scale, Li Yunqin found that the spiritual power would change greatly every few steps, or even a dozen steps. At that time, he didn't think much about it. He just thought that maybe it was a paradise of Xianmen. Strangeness had its own reasons. But now, after seeing the scene in the narrow room, and having the experience of looking at the distribution of spiritual power in the whole world, from a broader and macroscopic perspective, the strangeness of the forest seemed to be explained. The position determined the field of vision. Now, with the limited memory that he stole from the narrow room, he stood on the floating mountain top and had a bird's-eye view of the places he had been to before. He outlined the few points where the spiritual power was different along the way, and then tried to overlap it with the distribution of spiritual power in the narrow room in his mind. Finally, he realized the Little Cloud Mountain was indeed an enlarged version of the narrow room. The direction of the spiritual power on the walls of the narrow room was faithfully reflected in the Little Cloud Mountain. Every 3 or 4 steps, there would be a difference in the density of the spiritual power. These 3 or 4 steps, in the real world under the Little Cloud Mountain, would be hundreds of thousands of miles. What it showed was the difference in the spiritual power in the real world. This Little Cloud Mountain was actually a miniature version of the real world. It was like a 3D landscape map of 1,000 miles, 10,000 miles, or even 1,000,000 miles. He didn't know who created such a great and terrifying thing. And they even covered it with a vast forest and created a river. They changed and covered the landscape that was almost the same as the real world. They also used even more ingenious methods to make the camouflage so that the spiritual power would not change. When Li Yunqin first saw painting Saint Chen Tao's spirit map in Evil King's Pitfall Mountain, he was shocked by the incredibly complicated aura in the picture. Even if he exhausted his imagination, he couldn't imagine that someone could create such a picture using any method he knew. Therefore, at that time, he put away the contempt in his heart and realized that there were indeed many things in this world that he couldn't understand or even do. But now the shock that this thing brought him was more than 100 times greater than before. If painting Saint Chen Tao was alive and saw these things, it should be the same feeling he had when he saw the Holy Spirit map in Pitfall Mountain, right? But now that he had discovered this secret, Li Yunqin stood at the edge of the cliff of the floating mountain. Under the moonlight, with his back against the huge scar in the sky, he let out a long sigh. He knew that his unlucky days, although he didn't know what would happen in the future, at least for this period of time, were coming to an end. People always have a change of luck. Looks like I'll be rich one day. He grinned, took a step forward and jumped down. Chapter 526. There was no sun or moon in the mountains. The sun and moon in the clouds were even more difficult to distinguish. After Li Yunxin snuck into Cloudy Mountain, the battle outside did not stop. It didn't stop and became even more intense. The moment the two wandering souls who called themselves the two sages came out of the mountain, they were seen through. Most high-level cultivators were different from mortals, but they were not bound by honor or emotions. As a result, internal strife broke out in the Xianmen camp on the spot. The demons took advantage of the situation to pursue and attack, pushing all the way to less than 100 miles below the Cloud Mountain. After that, the fake holy ghost summoned the wandering souls that were originally stationed in various places back to help. Only then did the decline stop. After that, the two sides advanced and retreated, and the battlefront finally stabilized 200 li away from the Cloud Mountain. The descent of the Cloud Mountain was an extremely slow process, but after 8 hours, he finally sat steadily in the Tongtian swamp. However, the demons, who never seemed to know what fatigue was, once again launched a fierce attack, pointing their weapons at Mount Yin. It was as if they had seen the decline of the celestial sect, and wanted to take them down in one go. Seriously, reckless. Standing on the high platform, Su Yusong snorted in a low voice. He and Zhuomuja were supposed to return to Little Cloud Mountain and deal with the nobles and dukes brought back by the wandering souls. However, before they left, they received a message from Grandmaster Di. He ordered them to never return to Mount Yunshan unless they defeated the demons. This order was resolute and fierce, and the tone was unkind. When the two wandering souls received the order, they heaved a sigh of relief at the same time. This meant that the elders hiding in Cloud Mountain were about to make a move. When the two of them first came out of Cloud Mountain, they only wore the skin of a sage, and not their physical bodies. It was because they were afraid that the power would be too strong for them to control. If they looked stupid and stumbling, they would be seen through at a glance. That was why the profound realm sect masters and sect masters had put them in such a difficult situation, and the defensive line had been quickly routed. Grandmaster Di asked them to go down the mountain, saying that it was to find the Red Pearl. With such a defeat, there was no need to talk about finding the Red Pearl. Therefore, he had planned to return to the Little Cloud Mountain and wear the sage's body. But in reality, this was also a stupid idea. Cloud Mountain, Xian Sect Ancestral Court. It was driven by a celestial's formation, and there was a powerful barrier around it. How could such a thing only be able to defend and not attack? Su Yusong and Zhuomuja knew that the formation on Cloud Mountain could help them. This was because he had read about something in the ancient books of the Celestial Sect of Wonders. It was said that in a certain year, during the reign of a certain saint, Yunshan had fallen to the ground. In the end, it happened to be that year when the land moved. The commotion was so great that dozens of nearby counties and prefectures could feel it. It even caused rivers to change their course and mountains to collapse. Anyone who had experienced the power of an earthquake would know how powerful it was. Because it was so powerful, it seemed to have triggered a certain mechanism in the Cloud Mountain. It was said that at that time, the entire Cloudy Mountain suddenly emitted thousands of beams of mysterious light. Although they disappeared in the blink of an eye, the land nearby was boiled, and the boiling magma was hundreds of feet deep. The word used in the records was an instant. One had to know that the reaction of mortals was slow, but the reaction of cultivators was extremely sensitive. In the instant of the saint's perception, such a powerful force poured out in all directions. How powerful was the formation? How terrifying was its power? At that time, the saint discovered this and knew that there was a powerful force hidden in Yunshan that they did not know about. It seemed that the earthquake had triggered that force, thinking that Yunshan was in trouble, so it was triggered. However, after searching hard, there was no result. and they realized that the force might have something to do with the formation of the Celestials in the mountain. It should be an insurance that the Celestials had left for Yunshan. If they encountered a calamity in the future, and were at their wits' end, there was still such a backup plan. The saints could not find a clue, but the elders of the Freemasonry seemed to be able to. The reason why Su Yusong thought so was because he felt that he had understood the temperament of the elders. Those people all looked to be in the Grand Supreme Realm, but for some reason, they seemed to be unable to use their divine powers or physical bodies. Logically speaking, the physical bodies of the Grand Supreme Realm were enough to run amok in the world, but they seemed to think that their bodies were the most precious in the world, and they could not touch even the slightest bit of danger. Yet, such a group of people chose to hide in Yunshan. Yunshan was high in the sky, and was indeed safe. However, there were many cultivators in Yunshan. Once the secret of the Freemasonry was exposed, and the hiding place of the elders was discovered, Yunshan would probably become the most dangerous place in the world for the elders. Therefore, they must have something that they thought was enough to protect themselves and intimidate cultivators. The reason why Su Yusong and Zhuomuja were trapped for more than 1,000 years and did not use their divine powers to force their way out of Yunshan was because they were afraid of this matter. Now that the demons were besieging them, the elders gave a slightly arrogant order of, if they could not defeat the demons, they were not allowed to return to Yunshan. It seemed to mean that they had nothing to fear. They had a trump card in their hands and knew that this matter could be resolved in the end, but they insisted on asking the wandering souls of the Freemasonry to fight to the death first. This was indeed what the elders would do. They wanted to destroy the demons and the celestial sect. How could they not want to destroy those who were becoming more and more disobedient to them, and who were becoming more and more of a threat? Su Yusong's guess was right. Less than an hour after receiving the first order from Grandpa D, the second order arrived. It was to ask them to gather the demons in one place, and then slowly make a plan. Previously, the demons had already defeated the cultivators of the celestial sect. If they were to get entangled with them, what was there to plan for? They would probably be pushed up Yunshan even faster. But since they gave such a stupid order at this moment, Su Yusong was certain that the elders and the demons had the same idea. They wanted to destroy. It was just that the big demons wanted to sacrifice the small demons to achieve their own realm, and the elders would not even let the big demons go. Therefore, when he saw the fiendish demons attacking again, Su Yusong stood on the 6 temporary high platforms and sneered. These demons weren't exactly stupid. The Dragon Son's plan was quite clear. They knew that the celestial sect wanted to get rid of the demons, so they drove them to come forward and reap the benefits for themselves. However, when a smart person made some wrong decisions, because he lacked some key information, he had already become a fool. For example, now, the demon army was attacking from 3 directions and was unstoppable. The cultivators of the celestial sect had been retreating and had lost their fighting spirit. But this place was different. It was under Yunshan. The masters who had cultivated to the profound realm might not have any emotions and could leave as they pleased. But the low-level cultivators still had attachment and respect for the celestial sect's ancestral court. These were beautiful emotions even for wandering souls like Su Yusong and Zhuomuja. It was because of these beautiful emotions that the low-level cultivators gathered their courage and continued the battle to defend Yunshan. They actually delayed the demons' attack. Now, the demons from 3 directions were besieging the cultivators in front. Originally, both sides could fly in the sky and dig into the ground, and the battle line was extremely long. But now, people were gathered in front of the Yunshan array, and subconsciously shrank together to protect themselves. There were more demons than cultivators to begin with. At this time, they were far superior to the latter. If one looked down from the sky, they would realize that the cultivators had gathered into a strong array with a radius of several kilometers. The demons surrounded them from 3 sides, and were nibbling away at their power like silk from a cocoon. However, once the cultivators gathered together, they knew how to cooperate better than the demons, and did not collapse for a while. But it was only a matter of time. On the platform, Su Yusong first sighed at the foolishness of the demons. After a pause he sighed again. Sigh. It's a good situation. Others might not know, but Zhuomuxia, who was beside him, knew. The good situation he mentioned referred to the hearts of those cultivators. Such strength, such emotions. They could have been used by them. As long as they waited for another 1,000 years, and waited patiently for the other high-level cultivators to either die of old age or become one of them. But now, such people and hearts were going to be buried here in vain. Su Yusong sighed and could not help but turn his head to look at Yunshan. Zhuomuxia said in a low voice, "Let's watch." The two of them had been together for a long time and had long understood each other's intentions. With just a few words, they knew what the other party was talking about. For example, Zhuomuxia wanted Su Yusong to watch, but not to watch the battle. Instead, he looked at Yunshan. They wanted to see what kind of magical power the elders on Yunshan could use at such a desperate moment. They had been subservient to the authority of the elders for too long, and after such a long time, the fear brought about by the mystery had begun to fade. The more they knew about the elders, the more they felt that they were not unreachable. Today, it was probably the last test. It was also at this time that a warning sign appeared. Su Yusong and Zhuomuxia's hearts jumped at the same time. It was as if there was a string that had always been taut. When it was there, you had been used to it and could not notice it. But now that the string had suddenly broken, a warning sign suddenly appeared in their hearts. Someone had forcibly passed through the restriction of Yunshan. The expressions of the two wandering souls changed at the same time. Who was it at this time? It was impossible to pass through the restriction of Yunshan with brute force, unless one had the cultivation of the supreme realm. But looking at the world now, the master of calligraphy had become a tribulation body and had no magical power. The master of sword had never shown up, but he was definitely stronger than the master of calligraphy. As for the rest, just as they thought of this, the talisman in their sleeves buzzed and vibrated again. This talisman had always been used with the elders. Without hesitation, Su Yusong reached into his sleeve and took it out. He saw the third order. He handed it to Zhuomuxia after reading it. The expression on his face eased a little, but he frowned. Grandmaster D said. He was the one who made the array. Tell us to gather a few more demons. He may have to use his tricks. Zhuomuxia's expression also changed. He left Yunshan. He came out. Ever since they gained consciousness, they had never seen an elder leave the floating mountain peak, much less leave Cloud Mountain. And at this time, Li Yunqin was in the palace of Qi, regretting and flying into a rage. He had given the translucent jade slip to the two wandering souls. Then, he began to set up a trap for the fake sage, thinking that the two people might come back to check if they knew that the restriction of Yunshan had been triggered. But they would never know that it was the elders of the Freemasonry who told the two wandering souls not to come back. All these things happened at the same time, and after about half an hour, Su Yusong and Zhuomuxia still did not know what was happening on the floating mountain. At this time, there were many casualties among the Taoist sect cultivators. The two of them also became anxious. The wandering souls were behind them, not on the battlefield. If the elders of Yunshan delayed and did not use their tricks, this group of people would definitely collapse. At that time, he would have to call the possessed sect masters and sect leaders to come forward. But these people, they were an indispensable part of his plan for the future. The Taoist sect was destroyed, but the two wandering souls wanted to completely take over the remaining power of the Taoist sect for their own use. These people would be the foundation for him to rebuild the Taoist sect. If the elders wanted him to throw these people into the battlefield as well. At this moment, Su Yusong's mind was spinning. He used to think that he was more scheming than others, and that many people and things in the world were under his control. For example, Li Yunqin thought that his intelligence was unparalleled in the world. But in the end, didn't he still fall into his own trap and die on the battlefield? One had to know that he was in the Little Cloud Mountain. Although the time in the Little Cloud Mountain could not be adjusted as he pleased due to certain restrictions, it was still possible to treat one day as several days and several days as one day when needed. Thus, A matter that others needed to make a decision in an instant could be extended by several times for him to think carefully and deduce. One plan might not be perfect, but he still had enough time to consider a few more plans. In terms of strategy, anyone in the world who competed with him was practically equivalent to competing with a dozen or even dozens of him. In the past, he had enough time to check and fill in the gaps. However, now that he had left the Cloud Mountain, he was facing the ever-changing battlefield. Many orders and decisions had to be issued in an instant. More thoughts flowed through his mind, requiring him to integrate a large amount of information in an extremely short period of time. Yet every time this happened, his thoughts couldn't help but wander. Many details related to one matter rushed into his mind at the same time, making it difficult for him to grasp the main point. On the Cloud Mountain, this was his advantage. He would have enough time to investigate every detail. In the end, he would integrate everything and arrive at a conclusion that was extremely close to the truth. But it was precisely because of this advantage that his thoughts became scattered and slow, at least in this real world. Thus, his previous advantage had now become a disadvantage. After leaving the little Cloud Mountain, he made a series of wrong decisions. Because of this, he could not adapt to the ever-changing situation. He tried to consider every factor, but there was no time for him to do so. In the end, he could only rely on luck to arrive at a certain conclusion and make a certain decision. Thus, in the eyes of others, he appeared extremely careless and stupid. On the little Cloud Mountain, Li Yunxin had said that he did not have the bearing of a true saint, and that his thoughts were constantly changing. It seemed to be because of this reason. And at this time, Su Yusong once again thought of Li Yunxin's words. In the past, he used to regard these words as the mockery of a defeated opponent. But now, he gradually realized that what that guy said seemed to be reasonable. For example, what he was hesitating about now was, for some reason, the elders of the Freemasonry might have left the little Cloud Mountain. They said they were going to use their divine ability, but never did so. The cultivators at the front were about to be defeated. Should he call the people behind him to rush to the front? He wanted to preserve some of the power of the Mystic Gate, but he didn't want to completely break off relations with the elders. Now he wanted to call the remaining cultivators back, but he hoped that the blow from the Cloud Mountain would arrive in the next moment. What if the blow was so strong that he couldn't muster the confidence to fight back, and finally realized that the elders were indeed powerful and couldn't be disobeyed? What should he do? Su Yusong groaned in his heart. If he didn't kill Li Yunxin, it would be great. If he really subdued him before, he was good at scheming, and Li Yunxin was good at scheming, he wouldn't have fallen into such an awkward situation, right? But Su Yusong's distraught state didn't last long. Very soon, a strange phenomenon appeared. The battle lasted for several hours. It was already evening, and the sky was gradually darkening. At this time, fire rain began to fall from the sky. Chapter 527. At first, no one noticed it. This was because before the fiery rain in the sky became fiery rain, it was more like ashes. This was a battlefield. Both fiendish demons and cultivators could create extremely high temperatures and violent air waves. Therefore, the situation on the battlefield looked even more fiery than the war in Li Yunxin's era. Blazing flames could be seen everywhere, engulfing everything that could be burned, turning it into ashes, and sweeping it up into the sky with a scorching air current. When these ashes reached the sky, they would create even more violent air currents when great demons and high-level cultivators fought. Therefore, they would be shot down again. They entangled in the sky and finally gathered together, turning into white, gray, or black embers. Then, like a sky full of snow, they fell to the ground. Therefore, although it was late autumn, the battlefield was like midwinter, with black and white goose-feather snow falling. In reality, the scene on the battlefield was even stranger. The effects of various divine abilities were mixed together, forming strange changes that even the spellcasters themselves had not expected. As a result, all kinds of strange phenomena were triggered in the land within a radius of dozens of kilometers. For example, in this place, because of the extremely cold palm force, snow was floating. Hundreds of steps away, because of a great demon's divine ability, it was so dry that the skin was about to crack. But further up, it was a heavy downpour that turned into superheated steam in midair. Therefore, when those black spots appeared in midair, no one noticed them. But after a while the black spots burned. It wasn't the black spots themselves that were burning. It was more like they had some kind of mysterious reaction with the extremely heterogeneous spiritual power in this space, causing the spiritual power that enveloped them to burn. Therefore, the fiery rain suddenly appeared on the battlefield, above the heads of many fiendish demons and cultivators. The first fiendish demon who discovered these things did not care. But the change from not caring to horrified only took about a dozen breaths. During this period of time, anyone who came into contact with this rain of fire, regardless of whether they were demons, cultivators, intent realm or profound realm, righteous or evil, would immediately disappear without a trace. They only had enough time, or perhaps not even enough time, to leave behind an abruptly stopped scream. Hundreds of thousands of demons fought against tens of thousands of cultivators. They fought endlessly for many days, but only a few 100,000 casualties were caused. But in that instant, from the moment Su Yusong saw the rain of fire to the moment he, Zhuomuja, and the Freemason cultivators behind them retreated from the high platform in a panic, they had lost more than 50,000 demons and cultivators in about 15 minutes. It was an easy, indiscriminate killing. There had never been such a thing in this world. A thing that could ignore all spiritual power and a tyrannical body. In front of them, there was no difference between a profound domain and a profound realm, and neither was there any difference between flesh and metal. It was as if a banquet had been interrupted when it was in the middle of a hearty banquet. The massacre carefully planned by the demons and the wandering spirits of the Freemasons was also interrupted by an even more terrifying massacre. However, this rapid and concentrated rain of fire did not last for long. After a quarter of an hour, they suddenly disappeared. It was as if he had accidentally jumped into the void and was a water stain that came from a terrible place. But now, after wreaking havoc and killing almost everyone on the battlefield, it suddenly evaporated. But it had already caused terrible consequences. If a heavy rain suddenly poured down in the wilderness, no one would be able to avoid it. Now this rain of fire was the same. Originally, both sides were going to fight to the death, thinking that there might be a turning point in the battle. However, in just a quarter of an hour, the hundreds of thousands of demons and cultivators on the ground and in the sky within a radius of several miles were killed. Before this, the battlefield was full of chaos. Every step they took, they could step on mud like flesh and blood. But now the battlefield was empty. The remaining survivors stood blankly and in fear. They were the only ones within a few hundred steps. And the cultivators and demons who were crowding around him not long ago were all gone. This is... Su Yusong opened his mouth, but the words were stuck in his throat. Grandmaster D said. He did not know if this was the method that Grandmaster D said could help them exterminate the demons. If it was, there was a strange mass in front of him. 3 breaths ago, this thing belonged to a great demon in the true realm. That great demon was extremely fierce and charged forward. It was about to kill through the cultivator's line of defense. When the black rain fell, it was centered on the entire cloud mountain, and the further it went, the thinner it became. But there was no rain at all near the inner part of the cloud mountain, as if the cloud mountain had blocked the black rain and cast a shadow. Therefore, this demon saw that the situation was not good, and broke through the encirclement towards Su Yusong and the others. And he seemed to think that this was caused by the high-level Taoists of Xianmen, especially Su Yusong and the others. The great fear stimulated his courage, so this great demon almost rushed in front of Su Yusong 3 breaths ago. But at that moment, his body was stained by a drop of rain of fire. At that time, the rain of fire had slowly faded, but its power was not reduced. The terrifying great fiendish demon's body instantly contorted. It was as if the armor on his body, the golden hammer in his hand, the hair all over his body, and the muscles that were harder than metal were originally made of water. Now that the water was stirred, it immediately became a mess. Half of his body was sucked in, and then, the rain of fire suddenly disappeared. So the remaining half of his body fell down with a plop, right in front of Su Yusong. If he died just like that, there was nothing shocking about it. How many lives had they taken by their hands? What was really shocking was that he did not die immediately. Armor, weapons, hair, and flesh all merged into one, turning into a small oval. His muscles were exposed, but there was hair in it. The muscle fibers and hair were mixed together, as if they had been carefully torn apart by some power, and then rearranged strand by strand. His skin and armor were also mixed together, as if the armor had originally grown on his skin, and there were some small bones in between, and they were connected by fascia. His lungs were exposed, and they were gasping for breath. And there was an eye embedded in the lungs, which was spinning. This incomplete strange thing that seemed to have been maliciously crushed and reassembled by the gods stared fiercely at Su Yusong, and from his lungs came a purring sound. This scene shocked the two wandering souls, and the people behind them. They did not know what kind of magic could turn a fierce great demon of the true state into this in an instant. For people like them who understood almost all the mysteries of this world, the unknown was not the most terrifying thing. Is this the trick of the elders? Is this the trick of the elders? Su Yusong nervously repeated these two sentences, and turned to look at Zhuomuja. No wonder they dared to call Yunshan down, and dared to call the two of us out. Originally, he still had the thought of independence. He thought that if the situation reached the worst, he might be able to gather the remaining forces of the celestial sect, and become another force that could compete with the elders. But now that he saw such a trick, he immediately remembered the records he had seen in the ancient books. The cloud mountain shot out thousands of beams of mystic light, creating a sea of lava around it. How could such a technique be inferior to what was recorded in the ancient records? If those seemingly cowardly elders had this kind of power, no wonder they could abandon the forces of the celestial sect. But Zhuomuja did not answer him. Instead, he stared at the still alive piece of meat for a while, and then said in a low voice, "So that's what it means." After sighing, he took a step forward and pressed his palm slightly. Then, the piece of meat was immediately flattened by an invisible force, and burst open on the ground. There seemed to be a sigh of relief squeezed out of the lungs. Su Yusong looked at her strangely. At this moment, Zhuomuja showed a calmness that was different from him. Although they were the two sages before, in this world, the man was in charge of the outside, and the woman was in charge of the inside. It was the same for these two wandering souls who pretended to be fake sages. Most of the time, Su Yusong acted arbitrarily, while Zhuomuja acted according to his plan, and did not often put forward different opinions. But now, Su Yusong turned pale with fright, while Zhuomuja appeared indifferent. She even lifted her foot, and took 2 more steps forward, raising her hand to brush her eyes. Then she narrowed her eyes and looked into the distance, saying in a low voice, "That's not all. Look." At this moment, there were not many survivors left on the battlefield. There were still less than 1,000 celestial sect cultivators left, and only tens of thousands of demons. It was just that these tens of thousands of demons were low-level demon soldiers and demon generals, and they were not very quick-witted. When they saw such a change, they were already scared out of their wits. Most of them immediately showed their true forms, ran wildly, burrowed underground, and flew far away. For a moment, there was chaos, and smoke and dust billowed, as if Celestial Sect had won a great battle. As for the remaining 1,000 cultivators, compared to the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands before, they were indeed not many. But if they were to gather in one place, it would be a sea of people that could not be seen at a glance. In the face of a great change, the meticulous and rational cultivators were always faster than the demons. Although this speed did not save most people from the fate of death, most of the survivors were high-level cultivators. A quarter of an hour ago, the Celestial Sect was defeated like a landslide. A quarter of an hour later, both sides were defeated. However, the surviving forces of each side had changed. Celestial Sect had regained the absolute advantage. But it was impossible for these cultivators. Almost all of them were above the transcendent state, to obey the orders of the two fake sages. In their hearts, this kind of terrible, indiscriminate killing, except for the two sages of the world, who else could do it? Thinking back to the internal strife among the high-grade cultivators in the camp, and seeing the fake Holy Emperor's group standing behind them, even the stupidest person would find it hard to believe, but they had no choice but to believe it. Su Yusong saw these people according to Zhuomuja's words. His expression was slightly serious. I know. It's a vicious plan to kill two birds with one stone. The elders did this, and the rest of them also see us as enemies. It's impossible for us to gather our own forces. The only thing we can do is to follow them with all our hearts. But Zhuomuja shook her head gently. That's not what I'm talking about. She raised her hand again and pointed into the distance. Look. Su Yusong was slightly stunned, but soon his expression changed and he also wiped his eyes. Then he saw it. In front of him was a vast plain. Usually, this plain should be covered with withered yellow weeds, but it was previously occupied by cultivators and demons. Now there were only flesh and armor, wildfire, and black smoke on the ground. Apart from the surviving cultivators, after Su Yusong opened his eye, he could also see the remnant souls. Long Sun started this war to plunder the remnant souls. But now the wasteland was practically empty. Indeed, many cultivators and fiendish demons had died in the previous battle. However, after they died and were stunned for a moment, they either regained their sanity, or because their souls were too heavily damaged and their cultivation was too low, and they became wandering ghosts again. But in the end, they would slowly leave the battlefield. On the battlefield, spiritual power was surging, and the killing intent was extremely strong. Even ghosts without consciousness would feel uncomfortable instinctively and stay far away. Therefore, at this moment, in the horizon that Su Yusong could see, there was indeed a group of green, dense wandering souls. Those were the souls of the dead from the previous slaughter. But on this battlefield where hundreds of thousands of lives had been lost in a quarter of an hour, but it was empty. The cultivators and demons who died, their remnant souls didn't stay, and they seemed to be absorbed by the rain of fire. Su Yusong opened his mouth, but couldn't say anything. This attack had wiped out the cultivators and demons of the Taoist sect. It made the remaining survivors turn against them, and also put an end to the possibility of the two of them establishing their own sections. It also cut off the demons' thoughts of taking those remnant souls into their own pockets. Who had such a brilliant method? After another 3 breaths of time, Su Yusong suddenly frowned. Impossible, impossible. He glared at Zhuomuja. Do you believe it? Zhuomuja was silent for a while, then said in a low voice, We've been with the elders for so long. If you want to say that they are all people with eyes like torches, and minds so deep that they can disguise themselves in front of us for thousands or tens of thousands of years, unless you and I both have pig and dog brains. So I don't believe it, she said softly, then looked up at Su Yusong. I don't believe it. At least, I don't believe it was their idea. The two wandering souls had always boasted of their unparalleled wisdom. They had always looked down on the elders of the Freemasonry. Although the elders were usually taciturn and aloof when they were in contact. But after many years, even the most taciturn people would occasionally speak and express their views. So the two fake saints knew what kind of people they were. They couldn't be said to be idiots. Even compared to the mortals of this world, these elders who claimed to be reincarnated celestials were actually quite quick-witted and knowledgeable. However, that was only relative to ordinary people. In front of the strong who were really good at scheming, ordinary people, very smart people, were no different from idiots. Those elders were more like a group of mortals who had accidentally obtained wealth and power, just like the useless sons of ministers in the secular world. They also knew that they made the elders feel afraid, so they lived on Little Cloud Mountain all year round, and would never set foot on the top of Cloud Mountain unless they were summoned. Because of this, they had the idea of being independent. But at this time, the rain of fire that filled the sky destroyed everything they had built up before. The timing was perfect. The power was so strong that it was impossible to resist, and the mind was extremely vicious. The elders might have such power, but they shouldn't have such thoughts. Su Yusong frowned and gritted his teeth. The thousands of cultivators in the distance seemed to be at a loss for a moment, unable to advance or retreat. In front of them were demons, and behind them were the saints they could no longer trust. They should have left the battlefield immediately, but in the distance, it was ancestral Cloud Mountain. They were hesitating, but Su Yusong ignored them. After thinking for a moment, he said in a low voice, "So it's Chen Zhao?" Chen Zhao really didn't die. Chen Zhao sneaked into Cloud Mountain and controlled the elders? The restriction on Little Cloud Mountain was touched. Was it Chen Zhao's doing? He said so much in one breath. But Zhuomuxia also frowned, as if he was seriously considering his words. Then he said, "But back then we watched Chen Zhao die. And there's been no news of her for so many years. Don't you think it's too far-fetched for her to suddenly jump out at this time? Moreover, this matter isn't her style of doing things." Su Yusong was silent, then nodded. "It's indeed not her style. If it was her, how could she let us go? She must have asked Grandmaster D to order us to go to the battlefield, and then catch us all in one fell swoop. Although Chen Zhao looks crazy, she's cautious in her bones. There's no reason for her to let us go. But, is it really Grandmaster D?" Zhuomuxia shook his head and looked at him silently, not saying anything. Su Yusong frowned. "What do you want to say? Have you ever thought?" Zhuomuxia said slowly and hesitantly. "Have you ever thought that Li Yunqin is really dead?" Su Yusong was stunned. "You mean, who else could think of such a vicious plan?" Zhuomuxia looked at him. "If there's a person who has such insight, doesn't care about the lives of cultivators, and doesn't care about the lives of demons, and can run into Cloud Mountain, who else but him?" Su Yusong glared at him. "Ridiculous. Let's not talk about the fact that we watched him die. What ability does he have to coerce Grandmaster D?" But when he said this, he also paused. Whether Li Yunqin was really dead or not, there was indeed room for negotiation. After all, he knew one or two secret methods that they didn't know. It wasn't unreasonable to insist on such a far-fetched explanation. But the second point, he didn't have to control or coerce the elders. Li Yunqin, that evildoer, they had experienced his ability of sweet talk and bewitching people many times. Those elders, if they really met him face to face and didn't kill him with a palm strike before he spoke, they would most likely fall into his trap. They would think that he was a wise man submits to circumstances and would submit to them. This guess was much more reliable than the idea of Chen Zhao reappearing in the world. Chapter 528. Thinking of this, Su Yusong's heart started beating wildly. Among the three options, Art Saint Chen Zhao has come back to life. The elders are extremely scheming, and Li Yunqin faked his death and went to Cloud Mountain. The third option was undoubtedly the most acceptable. However, this was just speculation. Rather than saying that the third speculation was the most likely, it was more accurate to say that they hoped that it was the most likely. That way, at least they wouldn't have to face Chen Zhao and the elders with terrifying power. It would only be a few dozen hours. The two wandering souls had previously controlled the Xianmen and the world, but now they were practically alone. There was a world of difference between the days outside Cloud Mountain and the days inside Cloud Mountain. This terrifying reality made them want to believe that there was a third party. That way, at least the familiar Cloud Mountain would still be there. But thinking about it, the two wandering souls weren't ostriches who liked to bury their heads in the sand. This speculation had to be verified. Thus, Su Yusong exhaled softly and composed himself. He turned his face slightly and said to a wandering soul behind him, "Go back to Cloud Mountain and take a look. Just walk around the mountain and see if there's any movement. Go check the Pill Cauldron Sex Mountain Gate and see if Gui Yuanzi is still alive." Zhuomuxia interrupted him and pointed to another wandering soul. "You two go together. If it really is Li Yunqin, Gui Yuanzi once ambushed him on Mount June. With his hatred and vengeance, he'll definitely find trouble with Gui Yuanzi." Su Yusong frowned, but he didn't say anything. The two wandering souls immediately accepted the order without any objections. Although these wandering souls were arrogant and unruly when they were outside, they seemed to be completely submissive to the two fake saints and followed their lead. When they were about to leave, they said in a low voice, "Senior brother and senior sister," but they. As he said this, he looked into the distance. He was talking about the cultivators who had survived. The two wandering souls selected by Su Yusong and Zhuomuja were the sect masters of the two sections. Coincidentally, some of their disciples who didn't know the inside story were also among the survivors. Although it was a possession, it had interacted with these cultivators for hundreds of years. Now that he was looking at her from afar, he really didn't know what he was thinking. After he said this, a young man in a purple robe suddenly stepped out of the crowd among the surviving cultivators. He took 3 steps forward, knelt on the ground and cried out in pain, "Master, what did I do wrong?" This group of people had bloodstains on their bodies, and many of them had light or heavy injuries. There was no lack of true realm cultivators among them, and there was even a profound realm cultivator among them. But they were all gathered in the depths of the crowd, discussing something. Only those with low cultivation bases couldn't make any decisions, nor did they dare to disperse. They could only watch with great worry, not knowing what to do. Now the young man seemed to have seen his master, the wandering soul who had spoken. His mind was stirred, and he could not hold it in any longer. As he knelt, many of his fellow cultivators also knelt down. A group of people covered in blood and injuries came to ask Master, "What did we do wrong?" in a sorrowful and heartbroken manner. The scene was even more unbearable to watch. But it wasn't just the people of this sect who had survived. There were also people from other sections. Originally, they were still hesitant and vigilant, but when they saw this scene, the shouts and cries of pain seemed to be contagious, causing the rest of the people to kneel as well. Of course, there were some who had seen the inside story and couldn't ease the hatred in their hearts. They stood upright and glared angrily, but now, among the more than 1,000 cultivators, hundreds had knelt down. Their cries of blame soared into the sky, like cuckoo weeping blood. It seemed even more deafening than the previous battle cries. The two wandering souls had originally turned to leave, but when they saw this scene, they couldn't move for a while. The wandering souls' realms were also high, but they weren't real cultivators after all. They also had many desires. These emotions included temperamental, ruthless, ungrateful, and naturally, there were other positive and beautiful emotions as well. If there was only darkness in a person's heart, and not even the slightest bit of light, then this person would not become someone who listened to Su Yusong and Zhuomu. He should become someone more terrifying than his senior brother and senior sister. Therefore, even these wandering souls who usually killed and possessed people without blinking, were stunned for a moment. Su Yusong and Zhuomuja had been false saints for 1,000 years, and they wanted to truly unify the celestial sect and regard the world as their private property. How could these wandering souls not have similar thoughts? The cultivators cried in pain, but the wandering souls were silent for a while, until another person emerged from the prostrating crowd. The wandering souls might not be familiar with the disciples of the sect, but this person was familiar. It was Ku Chanzi. This Ku Chanzi was originally appointed as the commander of the Black Tower at the front line. But the Black Tower was broken, and he retreated with the remaining troops. Demons broke through several lines of defense one after another, but he remained in the battle formation. He wasn't greedy for life and afraid of death, but fought bravely and didn't die. Then 2 wandering souls came out of the mountain. Ku Chanzi and the other cultivators who hadn't been possessed realized that the false saints were suspicious, and he was the first to attack. As a result, some of those high-level cultivators left and some died, but Ku Chanzi still didn't die. And now, after the previous fierce battle and the baptism of the rain of fire, he still didn't die. His luck was probably the best among this group of survivors. His cultivation was also the highest among this group of people. Now that he walked out of the crowd, the sorrowful cries were much quieter. This mysterious she cultivator, the new sect leader of the Langya cave abode, first glanced at these wandering souls. In front of him were more than 30 sect leaders who had been possessed by wandering souls. Some of them even used to be on good terms with him. But how could he have imagined that the situation would be like this now? He let out a sigh of relief and looked at Su Yusong. "Who are you?" Su Yusong turned his face and shouted at the two wandering souls in a low voice. "What are you waiting for? Go quickly. These people can't make any big waves." Then he looked at Ku Chanzi. After a pause, he said calmly, "It's meaningless to talk about this now. Now that the celestial sect has been overturned, a new era is coming. Ku Chanzi, although you're not one of us, you did do something for me in the past. Now that you're not dead, it's also fate. Don't die in vain. Come to my seat. The old celestial sect is gone, but there might be a new one." After he said this, the crying stopped. Those low-level cultivators were originally crying and sorrowful because they felt that they had been used as pawns and sacrificed by their master and senior, whom they had once respected. Their vision was limited, so it was difficult for them to think of a more terrible possibility. Even if they had some conjectures in their minds, it was difficult to take them seriously. However, after hearing Su Yusong's words, they had to believe it even if they didn't want to. So they looked at each other dumbfounded, hoping that they had heard wrong. However, it was indeed true. Ku Chanzi's expression also changed. Although he had always known about this was the first time he had confirmed it from the mouth of the sage. Although he was less surprised than those low-level cultivators, it still made this mysterious realm Taoist, who had cultivated to the point of being emotionless, speechless. After 3 breaths, seeing that Su Yusong was about to speak again, he suddenly raised his hand and shouted in a low voice, "No need." He looked at Su Yusong and said, "It turns out that the evil path has seized the celestial sect's tens of thousands of years of foundation. It's ridiculous that as a mysterious realm cultivator, I boast that I can pry into the secrets of heaven, but I still don't know. Forget it. Maybe because of this. Because the evil path is in collusion with the demons in the human world. The celestial beings hate this world and no longer issue decrees. It's also my fate. My fate is exhausted." Zhuamuja chuckled and said, "Celestial beings? You think?" But Ku Chanzi immediately shouted, "Don't be so arrogant, demon. How dare you talk about the celestial beings?" Zhuamuja was stunned, but he didn't get angry. He seemed to understand something, so he just smiled disdainfully and didn't speak. Su Yusong stared at him silently for a while and said in a deep voice, "So, what do you want?" 2 false saints, plus the sect master and the sect leader, who had been possessed by the wandering souls. There were a total of 35 people. Except for the false saints, 9 of them were in the mysterious realm, and the remaining 24 were in the true realm. If it were in the secular Jianghu, 35 top masters would not be able to defeat thousands of farmers. However, in the Jianghu, cultivators could sprinkle fire and thunder with a wave of their hands. Their amazing destructive power and attack power were by no means comparable to the martial arts of the Jianghu. Therefore, these wandering souls were not afraid of thousands of low-level cultivators. It was to the extent that if a conflict really broke out, these 35 people would be able to completely annihilate those people within 2 hours, if they didn't care about the consequences. The only ones who could escape were probably the true realm and Ku Chanzi, who was in the mysterious realm. However, at this time, Su Yusong didn't want to cause more trouble. The situation in the Cloud Mountain was unknown, and there were demons waiting for them. It would be best if all the dragon sons died. If they didn't die, they would be in a mess if they took advantage of the chaos to attack. Ku Chanzi looked at these wandering souls for a while and said in a deep voice, "I should have led these people to kill you. But enough people have died today. The rest are the only profound orthodox sects left in this world, and I don't want them to die here in vain." Speaking of this, he looked up at the huge Cloud Mountain, which had now occupied the entire sky, and seemed to have become the background of the world. When it was moving in the sky, it was difficult for people to have an intuitive sense of its size. But now that it had landed on the ground, it had become an unimaginable giant. Even the tall mountains nearby had turned into low hills due to its contrast. Even if he looked up, He couldn't see the top because the top was towering in the clouds. Then, the profound realm cultivator withdrew his gaze and said, I want to take them away from here. Although these people's lives are meaningless to you, they are different to me. If you want to stop me, I, Ku Chanzi, will kill one of you even if I have to die. If you think it's worth it, then come and stop me. After saying this, he ignored the wandering souls. He turned around and said to the helpless cultivators, Pay your respects to the Cloud Mountain again. If you want to go, come with me. The wandering souls didn't say anything. Ku Chanzi had seen through their thoughts. These thousands of people were the only cultivators left in the world. And these 35 people were also the only wandering souls left in the world. Without the protection of the profound gate, every sacrifice would be a huge loss. Because in the future, it would be very difficult to find a suitable cultivator to possess. Therefore, Su Yusong and Zhuomuja silently watched the thousands of people kneel on the ground one after another, and then silently kowtow to the Cloud Mountain like undulating waves. For most people, this would be the last time they would see the Cloud Mountain. Those who were seriously injured would soon die, and those who failed to cultivate would also die very soon. In the future, without the rich spiritual qi in the Cloud Mountain, without the medicinal pills, treasures, and ancient books in the sect, their cultivation would be even more difficult. Perhaps most of the heavenly heart technique would also be lost. It was really the end of their luck. Seeing this scene, the two people pointed out by Su Yusong's side and flew straight to the Cloud Mountain. Zhuomuja still wanted to say something, but Su Yusong patted his hand and said, Let them go. He stared gloomily at the cultivators who got up and left without any reluctance. At this time, they were more like refugees than cultivators. There are tens of thousands of demons on three sides, he said in a low voice. They retreated just now because they were scared. But if Long Sun is still here, the demons in the forest will soon be organized. At that time, there will be less than 10 of them left, and we don't have to do anything. Ku Chanzi must understand this, so he dared to say those words. Let him build up his momentum first. After saying this, he turned to look at the Cloud Mountain. I hope we... But before he could finish his words, he suddenly frowned. Looking at the Cloud Mountain from where they were, it seemed to be close at hand. The huge mountain was pressing down, as if they were under the eaves. But as the saying goes, looking at the mountain runs to death. With the size of the Cloud Mountain, it wouldn't look too small even if it was seen from 100 miles away. In fact, there was some distance between these wandering souls and the Cloud Mountain. He had asked the two people to investigate the situation inside the Cloud Mountain, and they immediately fled. Both of them were in the true state, and now they knew that the situation was urgent, so they naturally did their best. Therefore, although only a dozen breaths had passed, their figures had already disappeared at the end of the horizon. Chapter 529. Su Yusong and Zhuomuja looked at each other and saw the surprise in each other's eyes. Maybe there was a trace of fear, because Bai Yunxin and Red Madam had been captured by them under Ku Chanzi's orders and imprisoned in Cloud Mountain. Both Su Yusong and Zhuomuja knew Bai Yunxin. This female monster of the real realm had been walking in the world for thousands of years, but no one really caught her because of her adoptive father, the Golden Rock King. Although the Golden Rock King was sealed, he was still a great monster in the Grand Supreme Realm, and his adopted daughter couldn't be touched. There was another reason. Bai Yunxin often came to Yunshan to make trouble. The other demons avoided Yunshan like the plague, but Bai Yunxin was different. It was because her feather robe was originally in Yunshan. It was said that a Taoist priest surnamed Niu stole her feather robe 1,000 years ago, so she could not return to the place where the Golden Rock King was sealed. She often went to ask for it back, but to no avail. As for who the Taoist priest was, and why he stole it, few people in the world knew. But Su Yusong and Zhuomuja always knew that Bai Yunxin was called the Crane Monster and the real realm. But this was not her real realm. Today they finally saw it with their own eyes and realized that her real body was not the Crane Monster, but a red flame white phoenix. This meant she found her feather robe and returned to her peak state, the mysterious realm. Bai Yunxin's feather robe was originally taken out of Yunshan and fell into the hands of Dongting and Lord Dongting. Later, they also learned that Bai Yunxin kidnapped Red Lady, but there was no other news, which meant that the feather robe was not with Red Lady. Therefore, they were relieved to bring them back to Yunshan. Thinking of this, Su Yusong couldn't help but whisper. Did Ku Chanzi use some tricks when he caught them? He deliberately sent them to Yunshan? Then was it her who touched the restriction of Shaoyan Mountain before? For a moment, this was the most reasonable explanation he could think of, but Zhuo Muzha immediately shook his head. It should be the power of the Grand Supreme Realm that touched the restriction. The mysterious realm can't do it. I think he was released by someone. We were wrong about that. It's not Li Yunxin. It's... She looked up at Yunshan Mountain. It's him. Su Yusong was slightly stunned. He knew who she was talking about. The he, and she mentioned by the wandering souls, naturally referred to the Sage of Calligrapher, and the Sage of Sword whose names had been stolen by them. Someone must have helped Bai Yunxin. Furthermore, the person who helped her was at the Grand Supreme Realm. Other than Su Sheng, who had his consciousness erased, and was trapped in the floating mountain, they couldn't think of a second person. But the reincarnation body of the Master of Calligrapher, was his mind really erased? If the reincarnation of the Master of Calligrapher was really resurrected in the empty floating mountain, then what was that rain of fire just now? Could it be that the Sage of Calligrapher had made peace with the elders? How absurd. There was too much information, too many possibilities, and too little time, compared to their days in the Cloud Mountains. Su Yusong once again felt a headache and helplessness. Perhaps he had the ability to grasp the key points and make decisions quickly in the midst of a multitude of things. However, it had been obliterated by the long period of time in the cloudy mountain. Thus, he immediately reached into his sleeve and pinched a talisman. He drew a few lines on the talisman with his finger, and the talisman immediately burst into flames. After waiting for a dozen breaths, he looked up at Zhuo Muzha. Master D did not respond. In that case, we can't delay any longer. I'll stay here to prevent the demons from coming again. You lead the people back to the cloudy mountain. If Master D asks, just say it's an emergency, Zhuo Muzha whispered. If they're still here. Su Yusong nodded. Then he looked at her and was silent for a while before saying, be careful. Zhuo Muzha was stunned by these 3 words. Then he nodded, turned around and left. When they were still on the cloudy mountain, the two probably didn't expect that one day they would be reminded like this. Because for the 2 wandering souls, the situation at the moment was indeed unpredictable. It was just that they had left the little cloud mountain for dozens of hours. The whole world seemed to have suddenly become strange. The surviving cultivators who had left the cloudy mountain felt that they had lost their shelter overnight, and now the 2 fake sages seemed to have the same feeling. In fact, what they were most worried about was not the appearance of any enemy in the cloudy mountain, whether the enemy was Li Yunxin or the reincarnation of the Master of Calligrapher. What they were most worried about was, they, the wandering souls, had been tricked by the elders, just like they had tricked those cultivators. When Zhuo Muzha and the 4 mysterious realm, and the 4 wandering souls of the true realm, also disappeared in the distance, Su Yusong let out a sigh of relief. He flicked his sleeves, about to put the 2 incomplete wandering souls into his sleeves. He and Zhuo Muzha were wearing human skins, so they had the magical power to store all things. Xi and Shilyo didn't listen to him, so he temporarily put her into his sleeves. Lu Ling was seriously injured and almost dead, so he temporarily put her into his sleeves. Now he also planned to keep the 2 remnant souls. After returning to the cloudy mountain and refining them for a period of time, he would probably be able to save them. The 2 remnant souls, who had been destroyed by Bai Yunxin, spun in circles after saying such a clear sentence, as if that sentence had consumed a lot of their strength. At this time, they seemed to have gathered enough strength again. When Su Yusong raised his hand, they said again, when we just met, I saw a white figure. I suspected that it was Li Yunxin. It hadn't been a long time since they said that sentence. The two wandering souls had thought about the matter of Bai Yunxin regaining the feather robe for a long time, and then made a decision. It had only been a dozen breaths of time. Unexpectedly, they hadn't finished speaking, and were gathering strength to speak slowly. But no matter what, Su Yusong decided to temporarily wait and see, so he said, "This isn't your fault. You don't have to." But the remnant soul interrupted him, still saying, "I just asked. Is Li Yun Xian?" At this point Su Yusong's heart skipped a beat. He put down his hand and frowned. And then, the wandering soul gathered strength for a while, then said, "That female monster said blind dog eyes. To find Li Yunxin, to go to the cloudy mountain. He might be having fun with the salted fish." After saying that she regretted it. That's why she. Su Yusong's face turned cold, and he shouted in a low voice, "Did you hear it correctly?" But he was anxious now, and the remnant soul couldn't speak. After spinning for a while, it swayed left and right, like a gust of wind that was about to dissipate. This was because its spiritual energy was almost exhausted, and it couldn't speak anymore. His words were heard by the other wandering souls. For a moment their expressions changed. In fact, these people didn't take Li Yunxin seriously at first. But when they saw how afraid their senior brothers and sisters were of this person, they knew that he was a difficult character to deal with. But now that they heard this, Su Yusong's face turned livid. He really didn't die. He took another step forward. So, the reincarnation was also part of their plan. No matter what reason he had for making such a guess, he was right this time. Thinking of this, he immediately raised his hand and shouted, "All of you go back with me." But just as he finished speaking, a familiar scene appeared again. On the distant horizon, a dazzling light suddenly burst out. Previously, when Bai Yunxin killed the two true realm wandering souls, the light was incomparably magnificent. At a glance, it could be seen that only a profound realm cultivator could have such a momentum. But now, such a light burst out again. And it was even more brilliant than when Bai Yunxin attacked. It was as if a blazing sun had risen from the horizon, almost illuminating half of Cloud Mountain. In just 2 breaths' time, an astonishing gust of wind howled with astonishing warmth. Everything along the way, whether it was trees, withered grass, or rocks, was turned into powder in the wind. In just an instant. Then, a huge mushroom cloud rose up. There were thick flames rolling in it, mystic lights flashing, and electric snakes swimming violently. This terrifying power, it must be the Grand Supreme Realm. Zhuomuxia was fighting with someone. When he saw Bai Yunxin appear, Su Yusong was surprised. But now, seeing this even bigger scene, he was pleasantly surprised. This meant that Zhuomuxia had found Li Yunxin and caught him red-handed. The gust of wind that turned the boulders into powder was nothing to this group of people. The group of people immediately shot against the wind and went straight to the place of the battle. But just as they were about to set off, they saw another flash of light. It was an indescribable flash. It was as if 100 suns had burst out from that huge, rolling cloud of fire. The whole world was illuminated, and even the darkest corner could be seen. Then, along with the terrible roar that could almost shake people to death, came the billowing waves of magma. The previous explosion had set off a shockwave like dust mist. But this time, it set off soil and rocks that were dozens of feet deep. In front of the terrible power, the soil and rocks turned into liquid like water, and in the blink of an eye was melted into magma by the extremely high temperature. In an instant, the originally flat and solid ground turned into the sea of magma that Li Yunxin had seen in the narrow room. Su Yusong was sure that the previous attack was made by Zhuomuxia, because he could sense the familiar aura and spiritual power. But now this attack, this unimaginably violent power, and the flow of completely unfamiliar aura. Who was it? This was clearly several times stronger than Zhuomuxia's. It was almost as if they had put on their skin and flesh at the same time. The surprise in his heart turned into fear at this moment. This level of power, even Zhuomuxia might not be able to deal with it. And the 8 people she had brought, if they were 8 decent cultivators from the Xianmen sect, who had studied magic, they might have a chance to survive. But they were 8 wandering souls. Although they were strong, they were not flexible enough. If they were to encounter such an overwhelming and violent attack, they might lose their bodies. Su Yusong was shocked, but he did not lose his mind. He shouted, telling the remaining wandering souls to hide far away, and then he rushed against the terrible waves of fire alone. Before this, he had already lost 2. Now he had lost 8 more, and the total of 10 remnant souls would probably have to be refined again. But today, it seemed that their fate was really going to end. The more he feared, the more it would come. Previously, the 2 wandering souls could escape from Bai Yunxin's hands, because only the 9 heavens thunder fire could disperse them. But just when Su Yusong had this thought, amidst the earth-shattering waves of fire, amidst the seemingly solid fiery clouds, a continuous series of explosions suddenly rang out. The bright white, bucket-thick lightning bolts struck down from the clouds, densely packed, like a forest suddenly growing out of a sea of fire. If it was not the dragon's 9 heavens thunder fire, what else could it be? Su Yusong's hatred was about to burst. For a moment, he felt all his blood rushing to the top of his head, his ears buzzing, and a ball of fire seemed to explode in his body. With such a powerful thunder fire, not to mention the 8 wandering souls, even Zhuomuxia might lose his life. Now that things had come to this, how could he have the mood to think about the inside story, conspiracy, and overall situation? In his mind, there was only Zhuomuxia. When the countless lightning bolts struck down, Zhuomuxia's aura suddenly became extremely weak and scattered, as if he didn't even dare to think about it anymore. He flew straight up and let out a muffled, thunderous roar. At the same time, afraid that the other party wouldn't see him, he also showed his golden body that was hundreds of meters tall. Li Yunxin, if you dare to kill her, I'll destroy your soul. You don't kill her. He used all his strength and rushed to the battlefield in an instant. The golden body waved its arms and immediately tore the wall-like fire cloud apart. Then, a colorful restriction appeared in front of it, blocking all the lightning bolts that were coming at him. But it only stopped them for a moment. The restriction was immediately shattered, but Su Yusong's body shook, and he used his spiritual power to create another layer. In just 2 to 3 breaths of time, the mysterious light on the golden body had turned into a vast expanse. It was unknown how many layers had been destroyed. Once the fire cloud was dispersed by him, it revealed a terrifyingly deep pit underneath. The pit was filled with lava, emitting an astonishing amount of heat. It was like a lake. At this time, the aura of the 8 wandering souls that came with Zhuomuxia had completely dissipated. Zhuomuxia's aura was still there, but it was very weak. Su Yusong ran wildly on the lava lake for a while before he finally caught a very faint trace of it in front of him. After dispersing a large area of fire cloud, lightning and dust, he finally saw a figure in the fire fog in front of him. In the figure's palm was a golden round light. Wasn't it Zhuomuxia's divine soul? The divine soul that had lost all its spiritual power and only had consciousness and memories left. Seeing that the person was about to crush the divine soul, Su Yusong immediately shouted, Li Yunxin, if you dare to disperse her, I'll chase you to the ends of the earth until you die. He shouted fiercely, but he didn't dare to move forward anymore. He stopped. Now that there was a thick fire fog between him and the person, he could only see the figure's shadow, and he couldn't see the person's face clearly. The 2 of them were surrounded by thick fiery clouds that were swirling and rising into the sky. It was as if the whole world was burning, and the 3 of them were the only survivors. Hearing his shout, the figure's fingers loosened. No one knew what he was thinking. After a while the person sneered and said, "Oh, do people like you even know what love is?" Su Yusong was stunned. It wasn't Li Yunxin's voice that he expected. It was a woman's voice. For a moment, he almost thought it was Chun Zhao, but he soon realized that the voice didn't belong to her. He had heard this voice before, and it was familiar. It was, the figure suddenly waved her hand, dispersing the fire fog in front of her. It was Red Lady. Since you also understand love, I'll see how much you understand. Now Red Lady, who had a pair of bright horns on her forehead and fine golden scales on her cheeks, narrowed her long and narrow eyes and stared at Su Yusong. Kill yourself immediately. I'll let her live. Are you willing? Chapter 530. Su Yusong was only stunned for a moment. At this moment, he was thinking about how Red Lady got out of trouble, how she became so strong, and where was Li Yunxin. But these things only appeared in his mind for a moment, and he immediately dismissed them. Now he couldn't think about these things anymore. All his thoughts were focused on the golden light in Red Lady's palm. In fact, the hesitation only lasted for a moment. The next moment, the wandering soul of the Freemasonry suddenly raised his hand and hit his forehead with a buzz. Probably no one would have thought of this move. Red Lady only had time to show a hint of surprise in her eyes before the hand hit her forehead. With a bang, it was as if a huge cannon had been fired at Su Yusong's body. The strong wind brought about by the palm instantly blasted out a series of ripples in the sea of lava behind him. Even the ground behind him was blasted into a deep pit. Such a strong palm force directly shattered Su Yusong's forehead. It was shattered. His body was like a piece of porcelain. Now that he had struck his forehead with his palm, a crack slowly appeared on his forehead. After a while, the crack rapidly expanded, extending from his forehead down through the bridge of his nose, lips, neck, and all the way to his torso. The crack split into many fine lines and spread to other parts of the body. In just a breath's time, Su Yusong's whole body was covered with cracks, as if he had been smashed and had just been glued back together. Then he said, "Good. Now you let her go." Originally, his lips were tightly pursed, but at this time, as soon as he spoke, the skin immediately collapsed and scattered on the ground, and turned into dust in the blink of an eye. Along with the skin fell some fragmented magic treasures, which might have been kept in the skin before. There were also 2 charmingly naive dolls, which should be the people he had kept in his sleeve before. But Red Lady didn't look at these things. At first, there was surprise in her eyes, but now there was an inexplicable and strange light in them. It was as if she had seen some magical animal for the first time. She carefully looked at Su Yusong again, and then clicked her tongue twice. Holding the ball of golden light in one hand, she walked around Su Yusong. "So, you don't know how to feel bad for something that's not yours after all. I heard that your skin belongs to a saint. Will it be destroyed just like that?" At this moment, Su Yusong's remnant soul appeared. It was a hazy humanoid figure that floated in the air. Just by looking at its appearance, it was no different from an ordinary wandering ghost. The human body was used to protect the soul. It was like the shell of a shellfish. Now, he actually smashed the skin of the Grand Supreme Saint with a single palm strike, exposing the most fragile part of his soul. If Red Lady wanted to, as long as she summoned the 9th heaven Thunderfire, it would be difficult for him to escape death. The wandering soul only said, "I'm in your hands. Let her go." Red Madam stopped in front of him. Suddenly, the expression on his face disappeared, and he stared at him expressionlessly for a while before saying, "The 2 of you have done many bad things. My Lord Father and I parted ways, and my Lord Father's death might also be part of your sins. In the end, he didn't want to live anymore. He's really loyal to his friends." After she said this, the wandering soul fell silent and didn't reply to her. So Red Lady suddenly raised her eyebrows and shouted sternly, "I ask you why?" The wandering soul looked at her blankly, as if he didn't know what she meant. "I ask you why you're willing to die for her." Red Lady glared at him angrily. Her pupils narrowed into thin lines, looking beautiful and ferocious. "Aren't you evil people? Aren't you people who have killed countless people? Why are you putting on a show of affection in front of me now? Why don't you run away?" Her tone of speaking before was like a cat playing with a mouse in the palm of her hand. But at this time, the playfulness was all gone, and it was replaced by a burst of anger that came out of nowhere. Every time she shouted a question, the wandering soul's body flickered with the overflowing murderous aura and aura. Even the thick fire clouds that wrapped around them and spun straight up into the sky swayed. Hearing her question, the wandering soul blinked blankly. It was impossible to see the expression on his blurry face, but he still looked at her, as if he didn't know how to answer. After a while he murmured, "Why? Why? Red Lady took a step forward and moved closer to him. The pair of bright horns on her forehead almost touched Su Yusong's forehead, so the wandering soul's face revealed a painful expression. His body was like a piece of ice, and Red Lady's horns were like red-hot iron. As soon as she got closer, the wandering soul's forehead fluctuated as if his body was about to melt. But the wandering soul didn't move, as if he was absent-minded. Red Lady glared at him angrily. Yes, why? The two of you must have wanted to do something big after plotting for so long. You must have been willing to sacrifice and deceive anyone to protect yourself. But now, she gritted her teeth and said, because I wanted to kill her, you broke your own skin. If I used more strength, she would have died, and you would have died too. Why would people like you do such a stupid thing now? Why are you willing to die for her? You're so stupid. She shouted a few more times, and Su Yusong finally seemed to come back to his senses. His body shook, and he took a step back. I don't know why. Then he sighed. It's because of obsession. Hearing this, the expression on Red Lady's face also froze for a while. Then she suddenly let out a sigh of relief, and all her anger disappeared. It was as if a basin of ice water had been poured into her body, extinguishing all her anger. Obsession, she repeated and looked at the wandering soul. Obsession? Alas. Yes, it's because of obsession. This kind of thing. What can you do? She stood there in a daze. Suddenly, she looked at Su Yusong as if she was pitiful. Should I kill you or not? After saying this, she held Zhuomu's divine sense in her palm, and paced back and forth for a few steps. It was as if her thoughts were suddenly in a mess, and she didn't know what to do for a moment. An evil person like you is willing to die for her. Alas, an evil person like you also knows how to love. Unfortunately, he doesn't. I'm also willing to die for him. I don't know why. She seemed to be muttering to herself. It's also obsession. Although she was frightening when she spoke with a stern expression, it seemed that her mind was clear and her thoughts were rational. Now, although her terrible momentum had dissipated, and her voice was also low and soft, she looked even more frightening. Because it seemed that because of Su Yusong's words, she fell into her own messy thoughts. She suddenly frowned, then smiled, and then gritted her teeth. It was as if there were several voices talking in her mind, which made her even more confused. After a quarter of an hour, Su Yusong didn't move at all. His eyes were fixed on the golden light in her hand. When Red Lady paced and muttered to herself, her palm loosened and tightened, as if she would crush that thing at any time because her mood was too agitated. In this way she finally stopped. With her back facing Su Yusong, she stood for a while before suddenly turning to look at him. Fine. Although you are bad people, at least you understand love and affection. How many people in this world can really die for their lovers? Alas, letting you go is also giving two more sincere people in this world. She sighed in such a low voice. Su Yusong finally let out a sigh of relief. Then you, give her back to me. From then on, we will live in seclusion and finally. But Red Lady interrupted him, as if still trapped in her own world. But tell me, how can I make Li Yunxin love me as much as you love her? Su Yusong was stunned. So Li Yunxin is really not dead. Red Lady blinked. Tell me, how can I make him love me as much as you love her? The wandering soul hesitated for a while and suddenly smiled. Trapped by love. Is it a good thing? She and I don't have a choice. Since we can only become wandering souls with obsession, if we entrust our obsession to each other, at least we will have a companion for thousands of years. Otherwise, what's the difference between a lonely soul and a wild ghost? You are also a ghost cultivator, and you also have obsession. But if you entrust this obsession to a living creature, he may not have obsession with you. It's just a heart full of infatuation. Red Madame's eyes shone. She held Zhuomu's divine sense, and looked at the wandering soul. Then what do you want to say? Su Yusong looked at Red Lady, and was silent for a while. At this time the carp spirit, who had such terrifying power for some reason, said that she would let them go, finally calmed down. Therefore, he could see that the light in Red Lady's eyes at this moment was the light of joy. It was as if she couldn't make a decision for a long time. And now she was finally about to find what she was looking for. So she was pleasantly surprised. He knew what she wanted to find. She wanted to find a way to say, Li Yunqin loved me as much as you love her. This method didn't exist before. But now, if Red Lady wanted it, she could have it. Su Yusong was also happy to tell Red Lady this method. He smiled. Let him become a ghost too. Also give him an obsession. Since you are willing to let us live, I will repay you with this. You kill him, and take his soul back. And we will help you refine his soul into a wandering soul. Tell him to be infatuated with you. Tell him to love you only. You are each other's obsessions. Just like me and her. You can accompany each other until the end of time. This is the method I'm giving you. So Red Lady's eyes finally burst with surprise. She smiled sincerely. I knew it. Su Yusong also smiled. I know it too. People like us who are bound by obsessions. Alas, in the end we can. I knew you were still lying to me to harm him. Red Lady's smile suddenly disappeared. Her face was as cold as ice. You are really bad. However, the smile of the wandering soul was still on his blurry face. What no? After saying this, Red Lady suddenly retracted her finger. It was as if a bubble had been popped. With a soft popping sound, Zhuomuja's divine sense was crushed by her. Those memories, emotions, every joy, every anger, and even the obsessions that made the two wandering souls bound to each other, all turned into flowing light with this soft sound. His soul was destroyed. He had completely disappeared from this world, not leaving a single trace behind. Su Yusong let out a terrible, mournful, and extremely sharp scream. It was as if 10,000 banshees were wailing at the same time, or as if a fierce wind had passed through a long gap. This sound even forced back the fire clouds in the sky, causing the whole earth to tremble slightly. Suddenly, many faces appeared on his blurry face. Each face was filled with extreme anger and sorrow. His eyes were wide open as he stared fixedly at Red Lady, as if he wanted to swallow her alive. But Red Lady still looked at him coldly. So actually, you don't know what love is. Stubborn love. It's just an obsession. You deserve to die too. But I won't kill you. I want you to live. I want you to live and suffer. At this time, Su Yusong gritted his teeth and said. His voice seemed to come from his chest, as if there were hundreds of him buzzing at the same time, heart-wrenching. As he spoke, his face became distorted, and he no longer looked like a human, but more like a ghost from the netherworld. You are so vicious. So vicious. Red Lady smiled slightly. Have you forgotten that I am a demon? Do you think you are the only one in this world who can play with others in the palm of your hand and capture them? Today, I will let you have a taste of this. In the future, I will let others have a taste of this. As she spoke, she yawned. If you want to suffer, go and tell Li Yunqin. After saying that, she waved her sleeves. A gust of demonic wind wrapped in lightning rose from the ground, swept her directly through the fire clouds, and went straight to the horizon. Only this wandering soul was left. This was indeed a lonely wandering soul. He stood in the same place, and his face became more and more ferocious and terrifying. It was as if a beast was about to drill out of his body and devour people. Since Red Lady had left, the fire clouds that filled the sky slowly dispersed. The wandering souls that had been chased away by him before also heard his mournful roar, and also sensed an extremely terrifying aura leaving. Only then did they dare to fly into the fire clouds. They only saw the terrifying appearance of their senior brother. They were all shocked, but for a moment, they did not dare to go forward. They were not brainless people. How could they not guess what had happened? But they did not know who on earth had actually shattered Su Yusong's skin. Before this, a total of 35 wandering souls had returned to help, and 2 had died in battle. Another 2 were originally going to investigate the Cloud Mountain. But in the end, they ran into the bad-tempered Bai Yunqin. Their physical bodies were destroyed, and their true bodies were also seriously injured. Then, 8 of them left with Zhuomuja, but they were also met by Red Lady, and all of them were scattered. In just a short 2 hours, they could be said to be extremely unlucky. If Li Yunqin saw this, he might sigh about how the tables had turned. Thus there were only 23 wandering souls left, and Su Yusong, who did not even look like a human anymore. Since eldest senior brother could not take care of matters for the time being, the one with the highest cultivation base among the remaining wandering souls, the one who had possessed the physical body of a mystical realm cultivator, temporarily took care of matters for him. He wanted to ask Su Yusong if he had any other orders. But suddenly, he felt the ground tremble violently. It was as if a god had started walking on the ground. Chapter 531. Too many things had happened in the past dozens of hours. Now even the soul of Zhuomuxia, one of the false saints, had been dispersed, and their eldest senior brother now looked even crazier and more terrifying. It seemed that there was nothing else that could make people feel worse and dumbfounded. But when the wandering souls rushed out of the fire cloud that had previously wrapped Su Yusong and Red Lady, and saw the scene in front of them, they couldn't help but widen their eyes and suck in a breath of cold air. There were indeed people walking on the ground, but they were huge and terrifying people. Between heaven and earth, on this wasteland that used to be a battlefield, two huge and ferocious human figures appeared. It was already dusk. Because of the huge cloud mountains, the sunset glow on the horizon could not penetrate much light. At the end of the horizon, there was only the black silhouette of the Manchu Mountains and the Tuarentan Mountains, as well as the greenish-gray sky that looked like an iron curtain. Against the sky and the short but not short mountains, the two huge human figures on the ground looked particularly strange and terrifying. In fact, when the great demons revealed their true bodies, they were at least 100 feet tall. Although this true body might not be the size of their original form, but because of the magic power, in terms of grandeur, it was not inferior to these two human figures at all. But the two in front of them were two skeletons. They looked like human skeletons, but they were obviously not human. They had many more skeletons than human beings. Although they all seemed to have a head, 2 arms, and 2 legs, many bones had long and sharp barbs growing on them. It was hard to imagine how terrible they looked when they were alive and had flesh and blood. Now these craggy skeletons were walking slowly on the ground. Every time their feet landed, it seemed to make the mountains tremble slightly. The little light left in the sky shone through the cracks of their bones, but it seemed to make the earth even darker. And they didn't seem to be controlled by magic or divine power. They were alive. The wandering souls who rushed out of the fire cloud to see the scene in front of them looked up at the two huge shadows that almost stretched between heaven and earth, and were immediately stunned. They seemed to be breathing. White mist rose from the gaps between their bones. If one were to observe the details of their bodies from such a long distance, it would be possible to see dense fibers that were wandering on the surface of the pale blue bones. They looked like muscle fibers, but they were bronze in color. And with every step they took, the number of these fibers that slithered like snakes on their bodies increased. What is this? A wandering soul turned pale with fright. After all, it had been more than 200 years since he took over this body. As the leader of the Daotong sect who was at the peak of the true state, he had seen a lot. Even if she was a fake, she had cultivated a heart that was not so easily shaken by the baptism of time. But now, seeing this thing, the heart in his body could not help but beat wildly. It was hard to tell whether it was because of fear or some other emotion. In fact, apart from being huge and weird, these two skeletons did not pose any threat for the time being. They're just walking. However, they gave off the feeling that they were even more terrifying than the gigantic demon kings that had appeared on the battlefield before. Just looking at them was enough to make one feel breathless. It was as if the sky was about to collapse, and the earth was about to cave in. Humans stood in this world in fear, and had no one to rely on. They had to bend down and stick their bodies to the ground to feel safe. If these wandering souls were demons and not humans, they would probably know what this feeling was like. This was the power and pressure that came from a naturally powerful race. He cried out in panic. The wandering soul who had a mystical realm body also gritted his teeth and suppressed the strange throbbing in his heart. He frowned slightly and thought about it. He raised his hand and brushed it over his eyes. This thing looked like a skeleton, but its aura was strange and terrifying. He thought that it might be related to ghosts and monsters. Therefore, he raised his hand and opened his eye, so that he could see ghosts. It's fine if you don't want to see. When he saw it, he was shocked and let out an ah, just like the wandering soul before. Before this, he could only see countless bronze fibers swimming on the skeletons' bodies. Now he realized that there were souls of the dead on them. Thousands, tens of thousands of souls of the dead crawled on their bodies. From afar they looked like tiny ants or aphids. It was as if there was something extremely attractive in the cracks of these two skeletons. The souls of the dead that had existed on the ground, because of this tragic war, were originally wandering aimlessly on the plains in a daze. But now, all of them were excited. They maintained the terrifying appearance they had when they died, and rushed toward the two skeletons from all directions. Once they reached their feet, they climbed up along the metacarpal bones and leg bones, and burrowed into the cracks of the bones. The scene was extremely strange and terrifying. It made people's scalps tingle when they saw it, as if there were countless insects trying to burrow into their bodies. Because of these two skeletons, the souls of the dead on the plains also became a torrent. No one had ever seen such a scene before. What exactly was this thing? And the direction they were heading toward was Cloud Mountain. Therefore, the wandering souls in the profound realm were shocked. They immediately turned around and returned to the fiery clouds that had not completely dissipated, intending to see what their senior brother had in mind. Before the battle began, these wandering souls of the Freemasonry knew the elders' intentions. The elders' plans were the same as those of the demons. Originally, they said that the great demon dragons wanted the souls of demons and cultivators. Then, they would refine these souls to improve their own realm. Therefore, the elders were willing to push the boat with the current, although they didn't know what their true intentions were. They also wanted the cultivators of the Xianmen to die, and the forces of the Xianmen sect to be destroyed. Although the wandering souls had their own wishes, in the end, they finally knew that the elders were better than them. The black rain not long ago did not allow them to have any other thoughts, and they killed most of the people in an instant. But now, seeing this scene, the remnant souls on the plains, the remnant souls that the dragon son had spent a lot of effort to create, seemed to be all sucked away by the two skeletons. And the direction they were heading toward was Cloud Mountain. Could it be that the original goal of the dragon son wasn't them, but Cloud Mountain? Then what about the wandering souls? Therefore, as soon as he rushed into the fiery clouds, he shouted, "Senior brother, there are two outside." But when he said that, he was stunned. The two skeletons outside were terrifying, and the current Su Yusong didn't look inferior to it. His original expression was ferocious and terrifying, as if he was about to become a monster. But now, in just a short span of a dozen breaths, he had returned to normal. He just stared at the wandering soul that rushed in, not even blinking. When he was slightly stunned because of the shock, he suddenly opened his mouth, his voice low and cold. "Junior brother, how do I usually treat you?" Hearing this, the wandering soul was slightly stunned. Then, without saying a word, he immediately exhaled and activated several mysterious light restrictions around his body. He was not one of those fools who, upon seeing a person ask, either darkly or preoccupied, "So and so, how do I usually treat you?" and then stupidly stare with wide, innocent eyes and say, "Of course you have nothing to say to me." One had to know that the moment such words were said, the person would be slapped or killed by a knife. That was why he said in a low voice after being on guard, "Senior brother, what do you want to do?" Su Yusong actually laughed coldly, his expression crazy and strange. "Ah, you should also feel that senior brother and senior sister usually treat you well, right? It's not that I want to do anything. I want your physical body. Your physical body is in the mysterious realm, the highest cultivation level among the rest. It's enough for me." He paused. "Take it back to Cloud Mountain and kill that Li Yunqin again. It must be because of that little B asterisk starred. It must be because of that little B asterisk starred in Cloud Mountain. It's all his schemes." At this point, he seemed to be reminded of the pain in his heart again. His expression became ferocious again, and his tone became crazy again. But the wandering soul still said in a low voice, "Senior brother, you think too much." Usually, Senior brother and senior sister, use the physical body of a saint to lead us. I respect your strength, so naturally, I don't dare to disobey you. But now senior brother has lost that body. And I have used this body for more than 100 years. Even a broom is precious. It's impossible to take it away with just a word. Su Yusong turned hostile like flipping a book. But his junior brother also seemed to have received his teachings, and was not much slower than him. But Su Yusong still grinned. Impossible? What can't be possible? After saying this, he suddenly pounced on the restrictions. The face of the mysterious realm wandering soul turned cold, and he raised his hand to use a divine ability. But just as he moved his fingers, he suddenly felt his body go numb. And he couldn't even move his tongue. No, it was not that his body was numb. It was that his soul was numb. With this, the restrictions in front of him immediately disappeared without a trace. He could only watch as Su Yusong pounced into his body and shouted fiercely, "Did you forget that I helped you refine this soul of yours? Now I can take whatever I want and eat whatever I want." This was the last voice the wandering soul heard. Su Yusong pounced into his body, but what he took was not only the physical body. There was also the soul. This wandering soul, refined from the remnant soul of a human, was bound in a body and couldn't go anywhere. As soon as Su Yusong occupied his body, the two immediately merged into one. But it was more like his soul was absorbed by Su Yusong. According to what he said before, he had done something when refining this wandering soul, so that he could prevent them from betraying him at a critical moment and take their lives. But now, this Su Yusong seemed to have lost his mind because of Zhuomu's death. Except for the thought of avenging her, he didn't care about anything else. He didn't know if it was because of his sincere and deep feelings, or because of his broken obsession, or both. Chapter 532. He swallowed the remnant soul and occupied the body. He was only sluggish for a moment. After another breath, he could move freely. His eyes, ears, mouth, and nose trembled strangely for a while. Then he stretched out his arms and moved his legs. Suddenly he shouted, "Not enough, not enough. I don't have enough strength." The current Su Yusong was like a different person from the previous Su Yusong. This not only referred to his realm, cultivation, and physical body, but also the things that made up the original Su Yusong. In the secular world, there was no dispute why a person was Zhang San and not Li Si. Zhang San had Zhang San's body, and Li Si had Li Si's body. Even if the name, clothes, and status were changed, the person was still the same person. But for cultivators, identity, status, and even body did not seem to be the key. The key was a person's mind and memory. This Su Yusong was a remnant soul before he became a wandering soul. Since the remnant soul wanted to exist in the world and retain its mind without slowly dissipating, it had to be supported by an obsession. He said that he and Zhuomuja were each other's obsessions, and the two of them were also obsessed with their feelings for their child who died young. Now that one of them was missing, this Su Yusong looked very strange. He did still have memories of the past. He remembered Li Yunxin. When he couldn't find Bai Yunxin or Red Lady for revenge, he poured all his hatred on Li Yunxin. But his mind seemed to be no longer his own. His temperament had changed greatly. Now the tone, behavior, and character of this Su Yusong were very different from before. And his body and appearance had also changed. At this time, the Su Yusong seemed to be a new Su Yusong, and the former wandering soul who was reluctant to part with love. In a sense, after Exa and Shilio lost their favor, and Zhuomuja's mind was crushed by Red Lady, had already died. The person in front of him was just a stranger, who only had his previous memories. This new Su Yusong, after gritting his teeth and shouting, suddenly fell silent again. But his silence seemed to be more manic than manic. He was suppressing all his anger and hiding it. He gritted his teeth so hard that his eyes became bloodshot, and his voice trembled slightly. Only then did he slowly walk out of the fiery cloud. When he walked out, he naturally saw the two huge figures advancing towards the cloud mountain. Innumerable dead souls climbed on it, slowly making their bodies more substantial. There were no bones in a human's abdomen, but the skeleton's abdomen was protected by flat bone plates. In the gaps between the bone plates and ribs, He could already see internal organs. However, rather than saying that it was born, it was more accurate to say that it was originally withered and stuck in the cracks of the bones. Now that they had received some kind of nourishment, they became plump again. It was just that they were wriggling and trembling in the skeleton. The scene was extremely strange and terrifying. As long as he saw this scene, it would be hard for him to forget it for the rest of his life. On the surface of those bones, some roaming bronze-colored fibers slowly came to a stop. Then, they attached themselves to it, as if they were slowly forming flesh and blood. As for those souls, they were attracted by an invisible force and climbed onto the skeleton one after another. Once they got into the gaps of those fibers, they looked as if they were quickly tired. Then they slowly curled up into a ball, and something in their body slowly shone with a dark red light. In the end, it turned into a round ball. The densely packed ball was also entangled by the same dense fibers, as if there were eyeballs hidden under the flesh and skin, making people feel cold and numb. The strange thing was that these glowing balls were the souls of demons, and the souls of the cultivators were gradually melting, as if they were being dispersed into pure spiritual power. The wandering souls were surprised to see this scene, but then they saw Su Yusong, who had taken over the body of the cultivator in mysterious realm, walk out. His expression was not right, and even his movements were slightly strange. If it was any other day, they would have been puzzled. But too many unbelievable things had happened today, so they did not pay attention to it. Instead they asked, "How is senior brother? Did senior brother say what we should do?" Su Yusong looked at them in silence for a while, then suddenly said, "Senior brother, you can't do it. Go in and take a look." Hearing this, the wandering souls looked at each other, and for a moment, they felt a little lost. It was not that these wandering souls were really in love with each other. Instead, they were originally on the same boat. Before this, they were just tools in the hands of the elders. Except for Su Yusong and Zhuomuja, the other wandering souls had not even seen the elders' faces, and they did not even know the origins of the elders. All the wishes of the elders were conveyed by the two fake saints. Before this, when they learned that the elders were going to abandon the profound gate, everyone felt a little anxious. They were originally tools that the elders used to infiltrate and control the profound gate. Now that the cunning rabbit was dead, wouldn't it be cooking the dog? Therefore, Su Yusong and Zhuomuja planned to be independent, and this group of people had no second thoughts. But at this time, their senior brother and senior sister's plan had completely failed. If it were not for their good luck, the previous rain of fire might have killed them as well. Now that they, the wandering souls, had really become wandering souls with nothing to rely on. Now that Zhuomuja had disappeared, and when they heard that Su Yusong was also done for, they immediately became even more terrified. Therefore, after he said this, in just a short while, a dozen people turned around and entered the whistling fire cloud. The remaining few were also about to move, but Su Yusong's expression suddenly changed, and he shouted sternly, "Freeze!" However, this group of people were not frozen at the same time. Su Yusong had done something when he was refining the wandering souls. But among these people, not everyone was refined by him and Zhuomuja. Among the wandering souls of the Freemasonry, the oldest was Qing Liangzi. However, Qing Liangzi was the first to be refined, and it was not done perfectly. Just like many crafts, they had to be researched and improved bit by bit before the technology could gradually mature. Therefore, it was only at this time that Su Yusong and Zhuomuja could be considered to be of great use. Therefore, the things after that were done by them, and before that, they would not fall for his trick. There were 9 people left, 5 people who were frozen by him. The other 4 were stunned at first, and then suddenly turned their faces to look outside. Their first thought was not that Su Yusong was going to attack them, but that he had discovered something about the enemy. It was also at this moment that the bodies of the 5 people collapsed at the same time. Su Yusong only took a moment to collect their souls, and it only took him 2 breaths of time to devour them. When the 4 people sensed that something was wrong and looked at him again, a ferocious and deranged expression appeared on his face again. Good, good, good. More. he shouted crazily. With just a raise of his hand, he instantly smashed the head of another true realm wandering soul. Like peeling off the shell and taking out the meat, he grabbed the soul in his hand, and suddenly opened his mouth to the ear, and swallowed it alive in front of everyone. Su Yusong of Cloud Mountain was considered a normal person, no matter how one looked at it. Although Su Yusong had already gone mad just now, he could still forcibly suppress the violent emotions in his heart. But now, after devouring the souls of 6 people, it seemed that the part that once belonged to him was becoming less and less. All the negative emotions superimposed and mixed together, forming a monster that only had Su Yusong's memory and name. But the rest had nothing to do with the people in the past. Even the wandering souls, who were also monsters, were afraid of such a monster. The remaining 3 people turned pale with fright, and quickly retreated shouting, "Who the hell are you?" But now, Su Yusong was surrounded by a terrifying violent aura. His eyes became bloodshot, and his mouth opened wide. He ignored their shouts, and also ignored the dozen people who realized that something was wrong and rushed out of the fire cloud. He only said, "Not enough. Not enough. Then how can I kill that little bastard? And then kill those 2 female demons? Give it. Give it all." As soon as he finished speaking, he flew into the crowd and attacked. Although the wandering souls claimed to be proficient in the arts of Daotong and Kenzo, however, knowing a theory and actually cultivating and comprehending it were 2 different things. They had taken over the body, but without the state of mind and comprehension, they could not unleash the full power of these bodies. And there were also many divine abilities that they could not use. Otherwise, the 2 fake saints from before would not have been chased and beaten by a group of high-level cultivators of the Xianmen sect with their Taishang realm. This group of people were better at Taoist techniques than demons, but they were not as good as cultivators. Now that they had lost control of the Xianmen sect, the situation was indeed very awkward. It was also because of this that if the remaining wandering souls here joined forces, they would be able to kill the crazy Su Yusong with some effort and price. But now, there was no reason for them to fight or stay here. Seeing Su Yusong charging over, the last bit of people's hearts dissipated. An hour ago, they drove the surviving cultivators of the Xianmen sect away from this place. An hour later they also had to leave. Previously, when those cultivators left, they still bowed to Cloud Mountain, knowing that they would probably not see this sacred ancestral court again in this life. Now, the wandering souls did not even have the time or mood to bow. For a moment, they went far away in all directions, quickly disappearing without a trace. The experts of the true realm had made up their minds to escape. Without powerful restrictions and enough divine abilities, even the experts of the profound realm could not do anything for a while. This Su Yusong chased for a while, and only captured a wandering soul of the enlightened master realm and swallowed it. When he looked around again, he only saw the surging souls of the dead on the wasteland, and the 2 huge, strange, but unswerving figures advancing towards Cloud Mountain. But at this time, in his eyes, he could see nothing but Li Yunxin. He did not stop, nor did he pause. After roaring at the sky, his figure turned into a blood-colored stream of light, heading straight for Cloud Mountain. At this time, he did not care about the overall situation, the future, the elders. He only wanted to kill that Li Yunxin. But someone else saw him, dozens of miles away. So they don't know either. These Freemasons don't know either. The person who spoke was hatred. At this point in the war, strange things happened. But no matter what for the demons, it seemed to be a perfect and unexpected result. The cultivators of the celestial sect were killed. The unruly demon monarchs of the various paths were also exhausted. The wasteland was full of souls of the dead, and the huge skeletons were even advancing towards Cloud Mountain. Perhaps they could break through Cloud Mountain today, achieving an unprecedented feat for the demons. However, at this moment Lord Tongtian Hatred, who should be acting like a victor, did not look very good. Because his left arm was gone. Not only was his left arm gone, but his left ear and a small part of his head were also gone. It was as if someone had chopped him with a big knife. He tried to dodge but failed, So the knife cut diagonally and cut them all off. If it were a human, he would have died a long time ago. But after all, he was a dragon, a demon among demons. Now the smooth wounds on his body had been sealed by the golden blood. But his hair was messy, and he looked a little embarrassed. But his voice was full of energy, so his life was not in danger. He was now standing on a high hill. Beside him was Zither. There was also the body of the golden-horned giant centipede, and thousands more demon corpses. The way these corpses died was also strange. There were no scars, but their bodies were shriveled. It was as if their souls and vitality were taken away by something, and their actions and expressions were still the same as when they were alive. It was obvious that they died suddenly and quickly, without any chance to react. And the Zither beside him didn't look very good either. Although her clothes were not messed up, and there were no scars on her body, but her face was pale, her cheeks were sunken, and her lips turned from pink to white, as if she had just been seriously ill and hadn't recovered yet. I'm afraid it's all for the benefit of others. Zither voice became cold, almost biting her lips as she spoke. He stares at the two huge figures without moving his eyes for a moment. You told me before that you were possessed by Little Nine, so you came to Dongting from time to time, and then he took you to the pitfall mountain of the Evil King. Then you had a fierce battle with Evil King and flattened that mountain. Hatred interrupted him, took a step back, spread out his hands and sighed. Young Dragon Master, I have told you many times. I didn't expect things to turn out like this. Do you think I can hide my thoughts from you? Yes. I went to Evil King's pitfall mountain and injured him severely. Then I found that there were also skeletons under the mountain. Then I learned the way to control these skeletons from him. I swear again, young Dragon Master, big brother. He shook his head helplessly. What the Evil King said to me back then was indeed true. You have to nourish its soul as a sacrifice first. After sacrificing tens of thousands of souls, it will come back to life and find trouble with the cultivators of Xianmen. When those souls are exhausted, it will stop. I swear he did say that to me. Big brother, weren't you there when we were experimenting with this before? If you suspect that I'm the one who did this, look at me now. Hatred raised his hand and knocked on the wound on his head. There was a clanging sound as if he was knocking on an iron plate. My head is broken. Why did I have to get myself into such a mess? What good does this situation do for me? Big brother, if you still don't believe me, just kill me now. But Zither Master still didn't turn to look at him. Instead, she narrowed her eyes, as if she didn't care about his explanation. She said that they can move after sacrificing tens of thousands of souls. But she didn't say that they won't recognize us after they move. The secret method you said to control them will be useless when they really come back to life. Now hundreds of thousands of souls in the wilderness will be sucked away by them. And it seems that they won't stop. There is no such thing as stopping by themselves. Speaking of this, he was silent for a while. Then he turned to look at Hatred and sighed. I'm not suspecting you, but you and I have both been schemed against. Someone told you those things through the mouth of the Evil King, probably for today's situation. We have done a stupid thing. We have released those incredible things. Just now they actually wanted to swallow us, two mysterious realm cultivators. Couldn't even protect me, a mount. Tell me about it. Now that things have come to this, we can't benefit from it. And the wandering souls of the Freemasonry seem to be falling apart. Those so-called elders, if they are really hiding in Cloud Mountain, they certainly won't benefit from it. Needless to mention the cultivators of Xianmen. So in the end, who benefits? Hatred finally heaved a sigh of relief, because Zither Master no longer looked at him with that cold and gloomy gaze. Then she shook her head, sigh. Young Dragon Master, in my opinion, we should leave this place first. What if Munanji benefited? Our Lord Shinria benefited? Zither Master stared straight at him and said through gritted teeth, what a good mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. Chapter 533. Zither, who had always been gentle and calm, now showed such an expression on her face and used such a tone. This made Hatred, who was also a profound realm great demon, feel slightly alarmed. This meant that the losses and setbacks in this battle had exceeded the young dragon master's expectations. If she was just angry, it would not be a big deal. But as the saying goes, lose at the swinging corner, gain at the mulberry elm. Who could guarantee that he would not want to take back what he had not gained from the battlefield? After all, in this world, no one liked to return empty-handed. Then, for example, right now, the two uncontrollable skeletons were continuously sucking away the souls on the plains. How did they use those things to refine their demon power? After realizing this, a dangerous thought appeared in Yazid's mind for a moment. Why don't we just swallow them? But then he realized that the person beside him was Zither June. If Zither June had the same thought, the one who would be swallowed would probably be him. Thus, when Zither June looked at him with such a cold gaze, hatred did not have the mood to think about whether it was the Divine Lord or Mu Nanju who benefited. He wanted to run away from Zither June as soon as possible. So he said, "We need to think about this at length. If it really is the Divine Lord's plan, then we need to be more sincere and united. Now that the arrogant demon kings are gone, we can only stick together." His voice trailed off at this point. He hesitated for a while and could not continue. This was because Qin Jun had been glaring at him ever since she said those words. There was no emotion in her eyes or on her face. She stood motionless on the hill like a statue. This appearance made Yazid even more flustered, and even cold sweat oozed from his forehead. Finally, he could not help but take 2 steps back. "Young Dragon Master, you know that among all the brothers and sisters, I am the most loyal to you." But Zither Jun still did not speak. Only when hatred gritted his teeth and took a deep breath, as if he wanted to say something, did he suddenly turn around. "What are you panicking for? I know your loyalty. Little Bai has told me everything about you." Yazid's eyes suddenly widened and his mouth opened wide. "Bai, Wanderer?" In the next moment he cried out involuntarily, "Young Dragon Master, I didn't." Qin Jun waved his hand. "If you had, you wouldn't be standing beside me today. That's not what I meant. He said that since you don't like women, maybe you like men." He smiled ambiguously and shook his head. "That's what he thinks." Hatred stood rooted to the ground, unable to speak for a long time. After a dozen or so breaths, he said in a daze, "That Wanderer Bai has always liked to play with me. So he's monitoring me?" The Zither monarch snorted noncommittally. He kicked away a shriveled corpse in front of him and said in a deep voice, "So, you don't need to let your imagination run wild at this time. You've been possessed by Little Nine, so you know what you look like. If there's no restriction to trap you at night, you'll probably wander around. I don't care about such things. I've told you before, the reason I want to kill these cultivators and demons is not because I covet their remnant souls. What realm do I want to improve? But for the sake of the big picture, I want everyone to listen to me. No matter how strong you are, what can you do? Is the Golden Rock King strong enough? He's still been sealed for 1,000 years. After saying these words, his expression softened. He glanced at hatred from the corner of his eyes. "Second brother, you're smart. But your cleverness is petty cleverness. Don't always look at yourself. Don't always think about how strong you want to become, what you want to refine and swallow. These are all small ways, the ways of an ordinary man. You have to look at the big picture. Do you understand?" Hatred was silent for a while, then said, "So, young Dragon Master doesn't care whether you can get the dragon soul or not. Whether you can do too." The Zither monarch sighed and looked at him helplessly. Hatred immediately said, Yes, young Dragon Master is right. I shouldn't always think about my own bravery. I should look at the big picture. But looking at the big picture, young Dragon Master, we should leave. There's no point in staying here for too long. Who knows how terrifying those two things will be if they really grow flesh and blood." It wasn't that he, a profound realm demon, was timid, but when he thought about the appearance of the 2 skeletons not long ago, he still felt a lingering fear. They had used a secret method to draw the souls they had collected into the bodies of the 2 skeletons, bringing them back to life. This step had been tried before. Li Yunxin had guessed that after he burned the wild forest, the souls of many creatures in the forest disappeared because they were sucked away by the skeletons. His guess was correct. However, that was only one of the many experiments he had done. Therefore, the Zither monarch in hatred knew that if they fed tens of thousands of souls to the skeletons, they would come back to life. If one were to say that it was strong, perhaps its own strength wasn't that strong. It had just reached the grand realm, and it couldn't use any divine abilities. Moreover, the tens of thousands of souls could only keep it alive for a quarter of an hour. When the time was up, it would become a dead thing again. But it had another unimaginable ability. Even the Zither monarch was shocked by this ability. Because of this, they believed that if they used this thing, they would definitely be able to kill all the demon kings and cultivators in one fell swoop. Once this thing came to life, it would be like the weak water surrounding the midland, forming some kind of restriction around it. Demons and cultivators would be shrouded by this restriction, and their divine abilities would be restricted. The range and strength of this restriction would change according to the number of souls fed to the skeletons. If they fed tens of thousands of souls, this thing could turn all cultivators below the true realm within a few miles into ordinary people who couldn't use any divine abilities and could only rely on their physical bodies. The divine abilities of demons and cultivators above the true realm would also be greatly reduced. At that time, although the skeletons had just stepped into the grand realm, it would be too easy for them to kill them. They had experimented several times before, and nothing had gone wrong. But they didn't expect that this time, a huge mess would occur. It was also given to the souls of the dead. They also used a secret spell from before. But these two skeletons wouldn't listen to them. It was like feeding an untamed beast. If you first gave it a piece of meat, it would obediently swallow it. But if there was a pile of fresh meat next to it, and you gave it another piece, it probably wouldn't even look at it. Perhaps it was because the number of souls on this battlefield had reached an unimaginable level. When these two skeletons really came to life, they immediately went berserk. The secret spell couldn't suppress them at all, and the restriction on their bodies was unimaginably strong. The Zither monarch was at the peak of the profound realm. But even such a strong expert like him had almost lost all of his divine abilities under the restriction of these skeletons, and couldn't even dance in the air. These two terrifying things didn't have any intelligence, and only wanted to destroy all living beings in their path. The Zither monarch in hatred had to use all of their strength to avoid being killed, but the demons that gathered back together had all lost their souls. Facing such things, it was just as hatred had said. Once they completely regrown, how terrifying would they be? But the Zither monarch shook his head. "We can't leave." He paused for a moment, then said in a low voice, "You must know, we were the ones who released these things. The evil king told you that these things are ancient demons with the power to destroy the world. In my opinion, although his words are exaggerated, they are not without reason. If we leave these two alone, they will regrow their flesh and possess even more terrifying power. If we escape now, where can we escape to in the future?" Hatred was stunned. The Zither monarch's words were too righteous and magnanimous. It didn't sound like something a demon would say, but more like something a cultivator of the profound sect would say. The Zither monarch seemed to see through his doubts and said, "You must know, we originally wanted to rule the world. If the world is destroyed, it will be our loss, not someone else's." Hatred opened his mouth. He wanted to say something, but in the end he didn't. He really didn't know what to say. If he didn't know that this big brother of his was actually very shrewd and intelligent, he would have thought that he had gone crazy. From the sound of it, he already considered the world as his own, and planned to manage it with all his heart. With just a few words, he would have to praise this young dragon master for his astonishing boldness and determination to become the ruler of the world. But now that he really had to do it, if he lost his life, how could he talk about ruling the world? But at this moment, how could he dare to speak carelessly? He had seen the Zither monarch's previous anger. If he really touched the bad luck, it would not end well for him. He could only sigh in his heart and said, "I will listen to young dragon master's instructions. So, what do we do now?" "I'm not doing anything. Wait for someone to show up," the Zither monarch said in a low voice. Little White's theory of earth qi and feng shui may be a bit far-fetched, but there is one thing that is accurate. Of these two skeletons, one is hidden in the Guan Yuan cave of the Yi Kingdom. The other is hidden under the Xiankong mountain. That should also be a cave. This is definitely not a coincidence. In that case, someone must have placed this thing here in the past. And now, someone used the mouth of the evil king to make this thing move, resulting in the current situation. This means there must be a way to control them. He paused here and cast his gaze into the distance. The two skeletons were getting closer and closer to Cloud Mountain. Previously, they walked on the wasteland with monotonous and mechanical steps, like marionettes. But now, there was another kind of body language. They began to show subtle emotions like real living beings, as if their will and emotions were slowly recovering. They began to try to raise their heads and shake their arms. It was as if something in Cloud Mountain was attracting them, making them want to peel off Cloud Mountain and grab that thing. So let's take a look. If someone really used our hands to make this happen, then let's see what they want from Cloud Mountain. At this point, his tone became more and more calm. But Yazi, who knew him, also knew that in this peaceful tone, the coldness was getting heavier. This debt cannot be settled like this. Since they asked me to do something for them, I have to repay them 1,000 times over. Every debt has its debtor. If I don't see who that person is, how can I leave in peace? You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.